Chapter 284. The abundant and surging water of the river turned into a huge waterfall, plunging straight into the darkness, and then disappeared without a trace. From afar, it looked like a white jade belt hanging in the night. Standing next to this black and huge abyss, it was as if the sky and earth had been turned upside down. The night sky was below, and the earth was above. The darkness and the strange starlight and white light formed a strange scene, and it was not static. Like clouds flowing, everything in the abyss seemed to be rotating, just like the vast and boundless galaxy in the sky had produced a terrifying vortex, as if it was going to devour everything in this world. Lightning flashed, twisting and passing through the black, cloudy galaxy, and there were bursts of low but majestic thunder from the depths of the abyss from time to time. Occasionally, when two blazing and dazzling lightning collided, it suddenly burst out an unimaginably dazzling light, illuminating the deep night sky, but then it quickly dimmed, and then was swallowed by an even larger wave of darkness. Lu Chen only felt that his throat was a little dry. He stared blankly at the strange scenery below, which was almost beyond human imagination, and was shocked by this huge and incredible scene. Just as Lu Chen was lost in thought, he suddenly heard a few hurried roars from beside him. Immediately after, he felt a grip on his wrist, and a sharp pain accompanied by a great force that pulled him backwards abruptly came over. Lu Chen let out a pained groan, and his body jolted awake. He saw that At had opened his mouth for some unknown reason, and was biting his hand with all his might, trying to drag it backwards. He was shocked and angry, and just when he was about to scold, his body suddenly trembled, and he found that he had already walked to the edge of the abyss, and half of his foot was already hanging outside. If he took half a step forward, he would directly fall into this mysterious and terrible abyss. It turned out that just now, unknowingly, he seemed to have lost his consciousness. If it were not for At, who was still awake and pulled him back, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lu Chen hurriedly retracted his foot, which was already halfway into the abyss, and took a few steps back. His face was a little pale, and he was gasping for breath. At the same time, he was horrified. This mysterious abyss seemed to have a strange power that could make people walk into a trap. It was really creepy. After a while, Lu Chen calmed down a little, but he didn't dare to look at this strange abyss anymore. He turned around and touched the head of At, who was standing beside him. Just when he was about to speak, he suddenly saw the huge mountain in the distance. His body trembled again. In that instant, he suddenly knew where this place was. Under the Great Snow Mountain, in the Chaos Abyss. The Great Snow Mountain, the Primal Chaos Abyss, and the Shattered Spirit Sand Sea. These three places were the most dangerous and terrifying core areas of the Land of Chaos. When he and At hid in the mysterious tree hole, the river water of the Dragon River had actually washed the seed all the way to the deepest part of the Land of Chaos. Even in the flourishing cultivation world of the human race, it had been many years since anyone had come close to the core areas of the Land of Chaos. These most dangerous places in the world seemed to have become legends. This result far exceeded Lu Chen's initial plans. One had to know that he had only wanted to take the risk to enter the central area of the Land of Chaos. After standing in place for a while, Lu Chen shook his head and sighed helplessly. He glanced at At and found that At was also looking at him with concern, as if worried that this man had been scared silly. "All right, at least we are still alive," Lu Chen said to At in a self-deprecating manner and shrugged his shoulders. No matter what, standing so close to the Primal Chaos Abyss, one of the three most dangerous places in the Land of Chaos, was not a pleasant thing, even if it seemed like nothing had happened for the time being. "Let's go and take a look at the other places," Lu Chen said to At and turned to leave. At was just about to follow when all of a sudden, the black wolf's fur stood on end and it bared its fangs. It let out a ferocious growl once again, as if it had seen a terrifying beast, revealing a look of terror. Lu Chen was shocked. Just as he was about to comfort At, he suddenly felt the ground beneath his feet shake violently. Then, several earth-shattering claps of thunder rang out from the Primal Chaos Abyss. Lu Chen turned to look in the direction of the sound and saw that the river in the distance, which had already become turbulent, suddenly began to twist and ripple. In the huge abyss, black waves surged violently, each wave higher than the one before. Lightning was swimming around crazily. Rays of starlight shone brightly. The darkness was full and surging. The dark vortex spun faster and faster. Suddenly, there was a moment when everything stopped. Heaven and earth held their breath and all things froze. All of a sudden, A loud noise that seemed to tear the sky and shatter the vault of heaven rang out from the abyss of chaos. A dark torrent rushed straight up to the sky from the depths of the whirlpool. All the clouds and mist were scattered in front of this terrible dark torrent. They could only stare at this strange scene that pierced through the sky. The clouds in the sky changed color. After a while, the giant black pillar gradually shrunk and disappeared. The primal chaos abyss slowly regained its calm. Lu Chen was shocked. Suddenly, he saw a small black dot appear in the sky. The black dot fell from the sky at a very fast speed. It gradually became bigger and bigger in his sight. It turned out to be a fist-sized black stone burning with flames. With an astonishing whistling sound, it fell from the sky. After a while, it smashed heavily on the ground hundreds of feet away from Lu Chen and Atsu, making a deafening roar. The ground trembled, and the black fire burned high into the sky. The ground was immediately scorched black. At the same time, sand and stones flew. Obviously, the force of the impact was astonishing. Lu Chen looked at the burning flames and the big pit on the ground. Suddenly, his face changed. At that moment, he suddenly thought of the black marks left on the ground. Go! He suddenly let out an angry roar, flipped over and jumped onto Atsu's back, hugged its neck and shouted, "Run!" Atsu seemed to have sensed something. It let out a long roar and rushed out with all its might. At the same time, in the boundless sky, a second black dot appeared, then a third, a fourth. More and more, until it was impossible to count. The entire sky was filled with black falling rocks, carrying with them endless flames and terrifying whistling sounds as they fell to the ground. Atsu roared and ran. Its body was as agile as lightning. It jumped and weaved, and even the rocks of different heights couldn't stop it. But soon, the burning black stones that fell from the sky began to hit the ground. At first, it was one or two stones. Soon it was too much for the eyes to take in. The roar was deafening. The sound of explosions and the trembling of the ground were endless. The burning flames began to spread across the land. Every falling boulder would cause a sea of fire and a large amount of sand and dust. Carrying Lu Chen on its back, Atsu desperately ran away in this doomsday-like scene. It passed through every narrow gap and dodged the feast of the Grim Reaper. Even if the flames burned its skin and flesh, it didn't flinch. There were many times when it was only a thin line between life and death. The terrifying rain of fire covered the land. If Atsu made the slightest mistake, it and Lu Chen would stay on this land forever. But in the end, Atsu still roared and rushed out with its body covered in flames and dust. It avoided the falling stones along the way and left the seemingly endless rain of fire behind. The thrill of the journey was indescribable. Even Lu Chen himself felt that he was in a desperate situation and couldn't escape anymore. But in the end, Atsu, the magical holy beast that was only good at escaping, exerted all its strength and finally brought him out. When the rain of fire subsided and the world became peaceful again, Lu Chen and Atsu stood at the edge of the land that had become a sea of fire. When they looked back, they were both speechless. At this moment, their bodies were all gray and black. Lu Chen's clothes and Atsu's fur were torn and burned in many places. And in the place where they were just now, no living creature could survive within a radius of more than 100 miles. Lu Chen finally knew where the black marks on the stones that he saw before came from. A dangerous place like the Chaos Abyss was indeed extraordinarily terrifying. And when he looked back into the distance, a desolate and withered wasteland appeared in front of him. It was boundless. "Let's go, Atsu," he said softly. Atsu responded in a low voice. It wagged its tail and followed him into the vast and desolate distance. At that time, the sun was setting in the west. Under the setting sun, their shadows were particularly long and thin, and they were cast on the desolate and boundless desert. Chapter 285. Lu Chen and Atsu barely avoided the terrifying rain of fire from the primal chaos abyss. It could be said that they had a narrow escape from death. Without any hesitation, they left the area. They could not go to the Great Snow Mountain either. It was a dangerous place that was on par with the abyss of chaos. Even if they went there, they would most likely die. As for the remaining path, they did not have many choices. On one side was the boundless desert, while the other was to walk back along the rocky beach and look upstream of the river. After much thought, Lu Chen finally decided to turn back and walk upstream. If this river was the Longchuan River, they might have a chance of finding their way back. As for the seemingly vast wasteland, It was too easy to associate it with the broken spirit sand sea that was on par with the abyss of chaos and the great snow mountain. Although Lu Chen could not be sure that it was that place, if the abyss of chaos and the great snow mountain had both appeared, it would not be strange for the broken spirit sand sea to appear as well. In this strange and unpredictable region, danger lurked everywhere. If they wanted to survive, they had to be careful. Even so, Lu Chen did not have much confidence that they would be able to walk out of this dangerous place. They slowly approached the river and began to swim upstream. At the same time, Lu Chen carefully maintained a distance from the river. He would only approach the river when he needed to feed on the fish in the river. Just like that, they walked for a few days without encountering any accidents. Although this was a good thing, Lu Chen still felt a little strange. It was hard to say if he had not been to the Great Snow Mountain, but the abyss of chaos that he had seen was an incomparably strange and dangerous place. It was very much in line with the legendary core zone of the disorienting lands. However, the legends also said that the disorienting lands was dangerous to the point where danger lurks every 3 steps and danger every 5 steps. Not to mention ordinary people. Even Yuanying Zhenren would have to be on high alert to deal with it. However, he had been walking here for a few days without encountering any danger. This was a little strange. Something did not seem right. During this period of time, he was suddenly in this dangerous place. Naturally, it was because when he hid in the seed, he was somehow swept here by the river. Lu Chen originally thought that he would be able to find some clues to return after walking upstream for a few days. But now he realized that he might have been wrong. Although he didn't remember staying in that mysterious tree hole for too long, at least with the gluttonous Atsu around, the food wouldn't last that long. But now, after walking for several days, Lu Chen found that the surrounding scenery did not seem to have changed at all. It was still a river and a desolate plain. Come to think of it, it was probably only when it was at the bottom of the Dragon River that the tiny seed was instantly washed far away by the rapid currents. That was how it managed to arrive at the abyss of chaos in this period of time. With this uncertain guess, Lu Chen and Atsu walked for a few more days. About 9 days after they left the abyss of chaos, they finally noticed something unusual. There was no change in the surging river, nor in the vast wilderness. However, in a patch of yellow sand ahead, Lu Chen saw a corpse that had decayed beyond recognition. The skeleton buried in the yellow sand looked a little scary, but after discovering it, Lu Chen's spirits were lifted and he was very happy. No matter what, the appearance of a skeleton meant that someone had been here before. To him, this was equivalent to a timely piece of news. The skeleton was extremely decayed, and most of it had been weathered into sand. Even the sturdiest skull had decayed in many places. However, after careful observation, Lu Chen quickly frowned and a strange look flashed across his eyes. This skeleton that had died at an unknown time looked like a human, but Lu Chen saw a broken fang near the jaw. He was shocked because it was impossible for a human to have this. This dead person was a barbarian. Atsu walked to Lu Chen's side and raised its head to look at him. Lu Chen straightened his body. After a moment of silence, he said to Atsu in a low voice, let's go forward and take a look. I hope my guess is wrong." At this moment, Lu Chen was guessing in his heart. He did not say anything, and Atsu had no way to ask. Of course, although Atsu was now a holy beast, it still did not know the human language, so it could not ask. The two of them stepped over the skeleton and continued forward. The dry wind blew from the wilderness and blew up a patch of yellow sand, drowning the hideous skeleton. The discovery of this skeleton was like a watershed. From this day onwards, the direction that Lu Chen and Atsu were moving in began to change. Grass and trees began to appear on this piece of land. Although they were sparse and did not form a forest, it was clear that the situation was slowly improving. The aura of life began to thicken in this piece of land. Later, Lu Chen actually saw a small oasis formed by a small forest in the desert. There were some small animals there, but they were not demonic beasts. They looked a little strange and seemed to be very different from the creatures in the divine central continent. At the very least, some of the beasts in this place looked very weak. Lu Chen caught 2 beasts that looked similar to wild rabbits as a way to improve his and Atsu's meals. It was unknown whether it was because no one had come here for a long time, but these weak beasts did not seem to be able to resist. However, Atsu seemed to have no interest in the meat of these weak beasts. It used its mouth to pull Lu Chen's clothes and dragged him toward the river. It looked like it wanted to eat the fish in the river. Lu Chen was also helpless. In the end, he could only help it catch 2 more beasts to deal with it. After that, they continued to move forward. Lu Chen had a feeling that the change he was looking for might be right in front of him. However, this change came very quickly and was also very big, so much so that Lu Chen was somewhat unprepared. On the second morning after he left the small oasis, he and Atsu were still walking upstream in a desolate wasteland when they suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the desert in the distance. The sound was unusually desolate and tragic, and the tone was boundless, as if it was recalling an ancient epic to the heavens. However, Lu Chen's expression immediately turned ugly because he felt that the voice was a little familiar. After thinking for a moment, he felt that this voice was similar to the voice of the old shaman he had heard in the battle with the barbarian tribe in the mountain ridge next to the evil Python Valley. This discovery made him look a little solemn. He informed Atsu, and then quietly ran toward the source of the sound. There was a big sand dune about 100 feet in front of them. Lu Chen and Atsu ran in that direction. As they got closer, more and more sounds came. It was like the howling of wild beasts, the blood-boiling sound of war drums, the crazy roars, and the roar seemed to be mixed with a bit of majesty. They climbed up, and then when they reached the top of the sand dune, they quietly poked their heads out. A battlefield appeared in front of them. It was a fierce battle involving hundreds of people. It was fierce and bloody, crazy and tyrannical. It was unfolding in front of them without any warning. About 100 feet below the sand dune, all the warriors on the battlefield were tall and burly barbarian warriors with tusks in their mouths. Most of them were bare-chested, and they were holding weapons made of huge stones in their hands. They were fighting in a violent manner. This battle seemed to be halfway through, and it had reached the most intense moment. Both sides were in a killing frenzy. Blood flowed everywhere, and corpses were everywhere. It was unknown how many barbarians had been decapitated, and their limbs were severed. The scene was extremely bloody. Atsu let out a low growl, and it seemed to be a little nervous. Lu Chen gently patted its head, but his expression didn't look good either. He turned his head and looked at the road they had come from, and the unusually long and wide river. He was speechless for a moment. Such a fierce battle between barbarians must be a war between 2 big tribes, and it was impossible for such a situation to happen in such a dangerous environment like the chaotic land. He secretly smiled bitterly, with a bit of self-mockery. He whispered to himself, "I've actually been washed to the southern wilderness." Yes, it was very likely that Lu Chen and Atsu were in the southern wilderness, where only the barbarians lived. The great snow mountain and the abyss of chaos he had seen were all real. But what was different from what he had imagined was that he and Atsu were now on the other side of the most dangerous area in the chaotic land. Perhaps, he was the first human to set foot in the southern wilderness in thousands of years? Of course, this wasn't something to be happy about. The southern barbarian territory had been separated from the chaotic lands for thousands of years, and there were almost no humans here. Moreover, if the legends were true, there were many barbarians who had the vile habit of eating human flesh. Similarly, if this was the southern wilderness, it could finally explain why the spiritual power of the 5 elements was so abnormal that it almost crippled Lu Chen's cultivation. On the other hand, the power of the black flame in Lu Chen's body was not damaged at all. It was probably because this power originated from this place. He smiled bitterly in his heart, and also had a headache about how to survive in the future. But with a loud roar, Lu Chen's attention was quickly drawn to the battle. He saw that at the back of one of the barbarian tribes, there seemed to be someone who was finally dissatisfied with this bloody and indecisive war. Then, a barbarian dressed in black and looking like a priest walked out. He raised his hands to the sky, and loudly chanted an incantation. After a while, a magic tool appeared in his hand, which seemed to be a piece of yellow wood. Then, as he chanted the incantation faster and faster, the yellow wood began to light up with runes, and a strong spiritual power began to fill the air. Totem power? Lu Chen's expression immediately turned solemn. This scene was very similar to that of the barbarian tribe he had seen in the disordered land. He just didn't know if the effect of this priest's spell would be the same as that of the old priests. Lu Chen stared at that side, his eyes shining. Chapter 286. The ancient incantation began to reverberate in the sky above the fierce battlefield, and immediately caused a commotion among the warriors on both sides. The difference was that the warriors on the side with the priest all revealed expressions of joy, while the warriors on the other side had expressions of fear on their faces. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, these incomparably valiant barbarian warriors, who would rather die than retreat in the face of blood and slaughter, would actually be afraid of the power of the priest. It seemed that to these warriors, this strange power was more awe-inspiring than death itself. Of course, Lu Chen could not understand this inexplicable mentality. They were not even afraid of bleeding to death, and yet they were afraid of this unknown magic? Come to think of it, perhaps these barbarian warriors had been instilled with the idea that the priest's magic was unparalleled since they were young. Otherwise, it was really incomprehensible. However, at this moment, he could not care about these things, because when he saw the magic staff in the hands of the priest when he cast the spell, his heart suddenly moved. He immediately reached out to touch his chest, and in the next moment, the half of the fire god's staff appeared in his hand. From afar, he compared the half of the fire god's staff with the magic staff in the hands of the distant priest. Very quickly, Lu Chen noticed that there was a huge difference between the two. The color of the magic staff in the hands of the priest was bright, and the whole body was smooth. Many runes were directly engraved on the magic staff, and even when it was not casting a spell, it could still be seen very clearly. However, after the priest cast the spell, although the entire magic staff emitted a yellow light, and the runes also lit up, it was in the form of dots. Many of the runes did not respond, and were still dark. Those dots of light also did not show any signs of connecting. Recalling the appearance of the fire god's staff when it was stimulated by the black fire spiritual power, Lu Chen discovered that all the twisted and complicated runes on the fire god's staff had a natural feeling of blending with water. Once the fire god's staff was stimulated by the spiritual power was like a stream of water, flowing through all the runes in the blink of an eye. Every place and every rune would light up, forming an incomparably complete totem. Up until now, the fire god's staff in Lu Chen's hands was only emitting light, barely able to be used as a torch. However, Lu Chen still felt that the fire god's staff should be much stronger than the staff in the priest's hands. Perhaps, just like what the old priest of the barbarian tribe had said before his death, this was a divine weapon? The fire god's divine weapon, the fire god's choice? Lu Chen curled his lips and put down the Vulcan staff. On the other side, although the number of barbarian warriors wasn't small, but after a long time, he could see that the warriors of several different tribes had joined forces to fight together. These barbarian warriors were also very brave and valiant. But, when the leader of the barbarian warriors came out, the situation immediately became chaotic. The warriors of each tribe only listened to the leader of their tribe. So, the scene suddenly became chaotic. The stone puppet had dragged its heavy body to the front. It let out a loud roar, and kicked its huge stone foot towards the barbarian warriors. A gust of wind blew past, and a few barbarian warriors who couldn't dodge in time were kicked. Immediately, deafening screams could be heard, and a few bodies were kicked away. Blood splattered everywhere, and their bones were broken and their flesh was torn. Then, the stone puppet raised its arm, and smashed its huge fist into the crowd of barbarian warriors. Boom! The ground shook, and a few barbarian warriors who couldn't dodge in time were smashed into a pile of flesh and blood. The other barbarian warriors seemed to be scared out of their wits. They screamed madly, and retreated with all their might. It seemed that they wanted to get as far away from this inhumane stone puppet as possible. The situation instantly collapsed. Even though the leaders of the allied army were trying their best to drive their warriors away, they couldn't control the barbarian warriors who were retreating. On the opposite side, a large group of warriors were laughing wildly. They were waving their blood-stained blades, and were following the stone puppet. On the side of the allied army, everyone's faces were ashen, and despair could be seen on their faces. Some of them seemed to be extremely angry. They tore their clothes, beat their chests and roared, "Why do they have a priest? Didn't the priest of the mountain spirit tribe die decades ago?" Blood splattered everywhere on the bloody battlefield. Many people were bleeding and collapsing, and an even greater massacre was about to descend. Lu Chen, who was hiding behind a sand dune in the distance, didn't feel anything. He had been used to death and blood for so many years. Once he hardened his heart, he could be extremely cold. Not to mention that both sides were barbarians, so he didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy for them. So when one side was about to be slaughtered, he didn't feel anything. He just calmly watched for a while, and felt that he shouldn't stay here any longer. Once the battle was over, the barbarians on the winning side would definitely clean up the battlefield. At that time, if he wasn't careful and was discovered by the barbarian warriors who had just escaped from the battle, it would be a big problem. especially the priest hiding in the depths of the battle. Although Lu Chen faintly felt that the priest's methods, especially his magic staff, were not as good as the fire god staff that he had obtained, but the various strange witchcraft and methods of the southern border barbarians were still hard to guard against. So, he finally decided not to cause any trouble. He turned his head and called out to Atsu softly, "Let's go." Atsu wagged its tail and crawled up from the ground. Lu Chen was about to retreat down the sand dune when he found that the fire god's staff was still in his hand. At this moment, it was still slightly hot, but the light on the staff was almost gone. He shrugged his shoulders and was about to put away the fire god's staff when he suddenly found that the priest in the distance had a solemn expression on his face. His hands were twisting in the air, as if he was in the process of controlling the stone puppet. Seeing that victory was in his grasp, it was obvious that the priest's face revealed an obvious look of arrogance. Then, he looked around and saw that the barbarian warriors surrounding him were all looking at him with reverence. The way they looked at him was like that of a god. The priest was extremely pleased with himself and couldn't help but laugh out loud. He had the intention to show off. As long as I can completely make these brainless barbarians who only have a body of flesh and blood respect me, I can successfully subdue this mountain spirit tribe. When I return to the war god temple, I'm sure the few shamans will be even more satisfied with me. The priest snorted coldly and made up his mind. He grabbed the staff beside him with both hands and didn't seem to cast a spell. In the blink of an eye, a violent force flowed out from the staff and poured into the distance. The power accompanied by the blazing yellow light directly passed over the heads of the crowd and landed on the stone puppet. Immediately, the originally incomparably powerful stone puppet seemed to have suddenly been stimulated, and its movements actually became twice as fast as before. Even the most obvious flaw was almost fixed. With this, the stone puppet became even more of a terrifying killing machine. It swept across the battlefield and slaughtered flesh and blood. In the blink of an eye, it was about to kill its way through the enemy's formation. The priest laughed out loud and the barbarians around him cried out in surprise. Their faces were full of reverence and they looked as if they were about to kneel on the ground. It was also at this moment that the fire god's staff, which had calmed down in Lu Chen's hand, suddenly lit up, just like a will that had been provoked again. Chapter 287. It was a sudden ray of light that rose from the fire god's staff. The entire sand dune seemed to be shrouded in this ray of light in an instant. It was majestic and turbulent, and the light was like fire, roaring loudly. Almost at the same time, all the barbarian warriors who were immersed in the bloody slaughter and life and death situation on the battlefield did not notice the abnormality on the sand dune next to the battlefield. The only one who felt it was the priest who was casting the spell with the staff in his hand. The earthy yellow staff that was at its peak state and invincible on the battlefield suddenly trembled violently. A few rays of light immediately shot back and returned to the staff, flickering non-stop, as if it was vigilant. The stone puppet in front of it seemed to have lost a part of its strength, and its speed and agility also slowed down. But even so, this terrifying and powerful stone puppet was still a terrifying existence that could not be defeated on the battlefield. The situation of the battle still did not change, and even the two sides did not feel anything wrong. At most, they thought that the priest felt that this little bit of power was enough to win, and there was no need to waste any more energy. However, at this moment, the priest's face suddenly became solemn. Just at that moment, he clearly felt a powerful origin power suddenly appear around him. This kind of pure and powerful spiritual power was something he had only seen from the few shamans in the war god temple in the past. Could it be that a powerful shaman had suddenly come here? The moment this thought surfaced in his mind, the priest's face instantly turned pale. Like the surrounding barbarian warriors who worshipped him, he was even more in awe of the few shamans who were at the peak of the barbarian race's power. He did not even dare to think of making an enemy out of them. However, very soon, the priest noticed that something was wrong. Because other than the wave of spiritual power, he did not feel the monstrous aura that seemed to be able to cover the sky and cover the sun that he was so familiar with. This discovery made the priest feel slightly relieved, and his eyes immediately swept around. After a moment, his eyes fell on the sand dune at the side of the battlefield. There seemed to be a ball of fire burning there, and the fire seemed to be enveloping the entire hill. And the wave of spiritual power that he felt before was coming from there. After seeing the fire, the priest could not help but be startled. Fire spiritual power? Didn't this power disappear from the wilderness for thousands of years? A moment later, the priest sneered and a look of understanding appeared in his eyes. Only the shamans of the barbarian tribe could master the true 5 elemental spiritual powers of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. Priests like him could only cultivate various kinds of secondary spiritual powers, but their power was equally powerful. Thinking of this, he felt a little disgusted with the enemy hiding on the sand dune. This was to disrupt his plan to subdue the mountain spirit race. Even if the other side hadn't made a move yet, as long as they affected this area, they would become his enemy. Since it wasn't Lord Shaman, then there was nothing to be afraid of. This priest himself was an extremely talented rising star in the war god temple. If it wasn't for the fact that his background wasn't too good and he didn't have the backing of a powerful tribe, his achievements would have been much greater than what he was now. It was precisely because of this that he was even more eager to subdue a tribe for his own use. But in the barbarian wasteland, all the tribes insisted on a single belief in the power of the totem. Apart from worshipping their ancestors, the barbarian tribes only worshipped one kind of totem. For example, a tribe that worshipped a fire totem would never believe in the power of a water totem. The totem spiritual power of this priest belonged to the earth totem system of the 5 elements. He wanted to find a tribe that worshipped an earth power. Moreover, this tribe had already lost its priest, so the tribe couldn't be too weak. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to provide him with all kinds of strong support, and it would be useless to subdue it. Therefore, subduing the mountain spirit race was something he couldn't afford to fail. Originally, he had basically controlled the morale of the mountain spirit race. In today's battle against 4 small tribes, as long as he won the battle, the mountain spirit race would be completely loyal to him. Just as he was about to succeed, an accident had occurred. This time, he couldn't back down no matter what. The priest picked up his magic staff and started to chant a mysterious incantation. His body turned half a circle, no longer facing the front of the battlefield. Instead, he looked in the direction of the sand dune. The leaders of the mountain spirit race next to the priest soon noticed that something was wrong. They raised their heads and looked at the strange fire on the sand dune. Suddenly, their faces changed. However, seeing that the priest was calm and composed, and that he was directly attacking the sand dune, they felt relieved. In this battle, the high priest had already proven his strength. A yellow light rose up like a vast and boundless wasteland. It turned into a huge fist in mid-air, and then smashed down on the sand dune. Lu Chen, who was hiding behind the sand dune, had a helpless expression on his face. According to his original intention, he did not care whether the 2 barbarians fought to the death. It had nothing to do with him. Just as he was about to leave, who would have thought that the fire god's staff would do something like this? Although Lu Chen didn't know why the barbarian priest was so decisive and didn't even hesitate to attack them, it was obvious that the priest regarded them as an enemy. The fire god's staff emitted raging flames, and the body of the staff became hotter and hotter. It seemed to be very angry. Perhaps the priest thought that the other side was bold and dared to provoke him? But even if he did provoke him, there was nothing he could do. Lu Chen was helpless against the fire god's staff that could only be used as a torch for illumination. Seeing that the other party's powerful fist was about to smash down, in a moment of desperation, he could only channel the power of the black fire in his body into the fire god's staff. The black fire flashed in his eyes. Almost at the same time, the fire god's staff shone with a strange light. All the totem runes appeared at the same time, and a pure and powerful spiritual power gushed out. It was fire. Black fire. Lu Chen was so shocked that he couldn't speak for a moment. He had tried countless times in the ancient tree hole, but he couldn't activate the fire god's staff. He didn't expect that there would be a change when he used it today. As the black flames on the Vulcan staff rose up, it immediately devoured all the original flames, turning them into dark flames. The entire sand dune seemed to darken in the blink of an eye. Then, a huge shadow appeared in mid-air, whistling as it flew. The giant fist of the barbarian priest smashed fiercely into the black shadow. But, it was immediately entangled by the black flames. Then, a terrifying scene occurred. The black flames started to corrode the giant fist from all directions. Then, the giant fist started to emit a low-pitched sound that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves. In the blink of an eye, the entire giant fist was corroded. The last bit of light tried to escape. But, it was engulfed by the sea of black shadows. It didn't even make a sound before it disappeared. In the distance, the barbarian priest's face suddenly turned pale. He spat out a mouthful of blood. His expression changed greatly, and his eyes were filled with disbelief and fear. At that moment, he seemed to have seen a ghost. He lost his composure and shouted, "Devil fire, devil fire! This is the power of the black fire." His voice suddenly became hoarse. A moment later, a flame suddenly emerged from his throat. It burned crazily, and danced wildly in the black shadow. It burnt and melted his flesh. The priest screamed at the sky. He even threw away the staff in his hand. He covered his throat with both hands and fell to the ground. He started to struggle and twitch. The barbarians of the mountain spirit tribe were shocked. They were all dumbfounded. They didn't know what had happened. One of the more courageous barbarian leaders, out of respect for the priest, took the risk to help and extinguish the flames on the priest's body. But in an instant, the black flame spread from the priest's body to his own body. Ah! A shrill scream came from the mouth of the strong barbarian warrior. He was not afraid of bloodshed, but at this moment, he seemed to be suffering from an unimaginable pain. He fell to the ground, twisting and struggling with all his strength. The surrounding barbarians screamed again and again. They instantly retreated to the side, forming a large circle. They could only watch as the two people in the middle were burned to death by the strange and terrible black fire. In the end, only 2 charred skeletons were left. When the priest died in pain and madness, the stone puppet on the distant battlefield suddenly stopped moving. A moment later, this incomparably powerful killing machine seemed to have lost the support of its skeleton. All the stones and sand shattered, disintegrating into a large pile of scattered rubble, and collapsed with a loud bang. On the battlefield, there was a sudden silence. The barbarian warriors on both sides didn't seem to know what had happened. They looked at each other with their mouths agape. But then, a mournful scream came from the back of the mountain spirit tribe's camp. It resounded through the battlefield, and the situation suddenly changed. Countless mountain spirit tribe warriors looked back. They didn't know who shouted, "The priest is dead!" But the crowd immediately fell into chaos. On the other hand, the morale of the allied soldiers of the few tribes was greatly boosted. A few of the leaders even seized the opportunity to roar out commands. A few of the warrior leaders even took the lead and charged into the battlefield, instantly setting off a furious counterattack. The mountain spirit tribe side seemed to have fallen from the highest point. The whole formation trembled because of the priest's death. Then, it began to collapse. The result of relying too much on a powerful force was that when that force disappeared, they would be weaker and smaller than ordinary people. The tide of battle turned in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the front line of the mountain spirit tribe's warriors had fallen. Blood splattered everywhere. Everyone turned around and fled. Behind the crowd, someone from the allied tribe suddenly roared, "Fire God! Fire God! The Fire God has been reborn!" Chapter 288. There was no turning back in that battle. The mountain spirit tribe's morale were completely shattered by the sudden death of the shaman. They were chased and slaughtered by the joint army of several tribes. Blood flowed all the way, and at least half of the mountain spirit tribe's warriors were killed, and they fled in panic. The mountain spirit tribe couldn't be ranked at the top among the barbarian tribes of the southern wilderness. Their overall strength was probably a little lower than the middle level. But after such a big battle, they had lost more than half of their elite warriors. It was a big blow to the mountain spirit tribe's strength. If they didn't have any more opportunities or powerful talents, they would inevitably fall into the ranks of the weak tribes. Different from the gloomy outlook of the defeated, the victors were full of excitement and joy. The armies of the few tribes chased after the mountain spirits for a long distance. The mountain spirits paid the price of more blood and human lives. After dying a bloody path, the armies of the few tribes returned triumphantly. Lu Chen, who was standing on the sand dune, wanted to leave before the fire god's staff quietened down. However, he soon discovered that he had been surrounded by the barbarian leaders and a portion of their subordinates. Lu Chen sighed and looked into the distance. He saw that the warriors in the distance were cleaning up the battlefield. There seemed to be 2 important things. The first was to check whether the fallen warriors were still alive. If they were comrades, they would help them back for treatment. If they were enemies of the mountain spirit tribe, they would smash their heads and stomp on their chests, so that they would die a more thorough death. For a time, the battlefield was once again filled with blood-curdling screams, accompanied by the maniacal laughter of the victorious barbarian warriors, turning the battlefield into a bloody scene. Other than that, they were probably looting. The so-called belongings were actually the belongings of the dead, such as weapons, accessories, and even clothes. Many warriors of the mountain spirit tribe were stripped naked after they died, and fell to the ground in shame and dignity. What was even more surprising was that the barbarian warriors of the other tribes, who had fought together in the bloody battle, were not only looting the dead warriors of the mountain spirit tribe, but also looting the dead warriors of the other tribes, as if they had gone mad from poverty. But in this way, disputes immediately arose. Everyone wanted to rob others, but their dead brothers absolutely could not be humiliated like this. So, there was an immediate uproar on the battlefield. For a moment, many people pulled out their weapons, and the atmosphere became somewhat tense. This had alarmed the few barbarian leaders who had come to the sand dune. Fortunately, these barbarian leaders still had some brains. They turned around and ran back, kicking, cursing, and yelling. Finally, they managed to restrain their subordinates. They separated most of the barbarian warriors and slowly returned to their own camps. However, they naturally wouldn't return the things that they had snatched from the barbarian leaders. In this way, the battlefield finally quieted down, leaving only a miserable and ugly scene. Most of the barbarians seemed to be used to this kind of situation. Although they were fighting fiercely just now, they seemed to have forgotten about this matter after a while. They were happily counting their spoils of war. Those who had a lot of spoils of war were laughing loudly, while those who had a little bit of spoils of war were dejected. Compared to these useless barbarian warriors, the barbarian chiefs ran back to the sand dune. It was only now that the Vulcan staff in Lu Chen's hand had completely calmed down. It no longer glowed or heated up, and the totem patterns had completely disappeared. It looked just like a smooth staff. How did a human feel when he was surrounded by a large group of barbarians in the southern border? Lu Chen felt that he had roughly understood. He looked at the barbarians who were slowly encircling him from both sides of the sand dune. He frowned slightly, and looked left and right from time to time, thinking about how to escape. And beside him, Atsu also seemed to feel the danger. His eyes revealed an ominous glint, and he bared his fangs. A low growl came from his throat, and he stared at the enemies who were encircling him from afar. After seeing the appearance of Lu Chen, who was standing at the highest point of the sand dune, all the barbarians subconsciously stopped in their tracks. Everyone's face revealed a look of astonishment, as if they had seen something unimaginable. After a moment, someone suddenly shouted, "Human race!" After this shout, the crowd of barbarians instantly burst into an uproar. Suddenly, there was a series of ping-ping-pang-pang sounds. It was unknown how many people instantly pulled out their weapons. They roared angrily, and it seemed that they were about to rush over and hack Lu Chen to death. Lu Chen's pupils shrank slightly. He took a step back and placed a hand on Atu's back. Just as he was about to move, the fire god's staff in his hand, which had already calmed down, suddenly flashed. A beam of flame swayed. It did not have a strong aura, but it was very obvious that it swayed towards a certain direction in the crowd of barbarians. All the barbarians suddenly froze for a moment. Their faces revealed a look of astonishment and instinctive reverence, but it seemed that the hatred in their hearts was even greater. Moreover, they did not quite believe that a human could possess such a legendary power. Therefore they still shouted loudly, and were about to rush over and tear Lu Chen into thousands of pieces. But at this moment, suddenly, a tribe leader in the crowd of barbarians roared fiercely. He took a few steps and rushed to the front, and suddenly ran in front of Lu Chen. Lu Chen's face was stern, and a black flame flashed in his eyes. When he was about to attack, he suddenly saw that the abnormally burly barbarian leader stared at him. Especially when he saw the black flame that flashed in Lu Chen's eyes. His entire face suddenly revealed an indescribable excitement. Roar! He suddenly roared, and turned around. He held a giant axe in his hand horizontally in front of him, and like a raging beast, he stood in front of Lu Chen. Stop! This roar was like a clap of thunder, instantly resounding through the entire hill. All the barbarians were stunned, and stopped in their tracks to look at the barbarian leader. Immediately, the barbarian leader waved his giant axe and roared, "Black Fire Warriors, come here!" With this order, a group of barbarian warriors that looked incomparably valiant immediately responded. From the clothes and accessories on their bodies, these barbarian warriors were all from the same tribe. With a clatter, they all stood behind the barbarian leader. Facing more barbarian warriors around them, these barbarians of the Black Fire tribe did not have the slightest hesitation. They directly pulled out their weapons behind the leader and looked fiercely at their surroundings. There was no doubt that as long as the leader of the Black Fire tribe gave the order, these warriors of the Black Fire tribe would not hesitate to fight to the death with this group of people who were their comrades not long ago. "Huayan, what are you doing?" A shout came from the crowd, and a moment later, 3 people walked out. They all looked like the barbarian leaders. It was also at this time that the remaining barbarian warriors seemed to have a subtle atmosphere. They all retreated and gathered behind their leader, and then looked at the people of the other tribes around them with vigilance. Among the 3 barbarian leaders on the left, middle, and right, the one who shouted was the one on the left. Then the eldest barbarian leader standing in the middle also shouted, "Huayan, we, the Black Fire, Thunder Lizard, Divine Wood, and Ghost Eye tribes, have joined hands to fight, and we are like brothers. Why are you suddenly pointing your blade at us? What do you mean?" The barbarian leader called Huayan, who stood in front of Lu Chen, had a cold expression. He was not moved by these words at all and only said, "This person has nothing to do with you, I want to take him away." "What?" The barbarian warriors in the 3 tribes suddenly became restless. The leader of the Thunder Lizard tribe, who was wearing a terrifying lizard head ornament on his head, scolded, "Are you blind? That's not a barbarian, that's a human." "Yes. How many years has it been since a human came to the southern border? He must be a spy, we must kill him." "Have you forgotten the humiliation our ancestors suffered in the north? How many great heroic souls lost their lives in that land? They were all killed by the human race." For a moment, the emotions of the tribes were stirred up, and curses came one after another. Even the warriors of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be puzzled and doubtful. Although they still stood firmly behind their leader, Huayan, from time to time they would sneak glances at this leader who had suddenly become strange. Huayan's face was still ferocious and solemn, and it seemed that he had no intention of backing down. He slashed the giant axe in his hand in the air, and with a low roar, he looked around and said, "This is the power of the Black Fire, the sign of the resurrection of our fire god." His face was ferocious, and he glared at the 3 people in front of him. The killing intent in his eyes was not concealed, and he roared, "Whoever dares to touch him will have to step over the dead bodies of all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe." As soon as these words came out, the area under the sand dunes suddenly became silent. As for the warriors of the Black Fire tribe behind Huayan, they all seemed to have come to a sudden realization. With a whoosh, they immediately surrounded Lu Chen and Black Wolfa too. The sudden turn of events made Lu Chen a little stunned, and he couldn't come back to his senses for a while. While the warriors of the Black Fire tribe in front of him were prepared to fight to the death, many of them secretly looked back at him, as if they were full of curiosity towards Lu Chen. In front of the crowd, the leaders of the 3 tribes were also stunned. Soon, everyone remembered the scene that happened at the most intense moment of the battle. The rising flame power had obviously defeated the mountain spirit priest's earth spiritual power, killed the priest, and destroyed the terrifying stone puppet. This was the key to turning the tide of the battle. For a moment, everyone was silent, and many of the barbarian warriors showed a trace of awe on their faces, and even put down the weapons they had raised. But at this time the leader of the Ghost Eye tribe, the only one among the 3 who hadn't spoken, suddenly said with a cold gaze, "Huayan, are you trying to take a priest back?" Chapter 289. Snatch a priest back? Many of the barbarians who heard Huayan's words did not understand. Their faces were filled with astonishment and confusion. But soon, the expressions of the 2 barbarian leaders who stood at the front changed drastically. Their gazes immediately landed on Lu Chen, who was standing behind Huayan. In the southern wilderness, for every tribe, the people who mastered the power of witchcraft were the source of the tribe's prosperity. However, there were only a very small number of people who could perceive the incomparably chaotic spiritual power and use a special method to cultivate witchcraft. These people were known as priests. And among the priests, those who stood at the peak and were able to grasp the source of the spiritual energy of the southern territory were called shamans. Any tribe that lost a priest would not be able to maintain its prosperity. This was not only because of the weakening of the tribe's power, but also because the priest was often the wisest person in the tribe. For many years, shamans and priests had always guided the barbarian tribes of the southern wilderness. The barbarians believed in and worshipped witchcraft, and revered shamans and priests. Without the guidance of the priest, the tribe would eventually weaken, and they would fall into a predicament in the vast and harsh wilderness. Without the guidance of the priest's witchcraft and wisdom, the only thing they could rely on was the flesh and courage of the warriors in the tribe. However, these things were extremely fragile in the face of great power. A few years ago, the mountain spirit tribe was like the other 4 tribes. They didn't have a priest and struggled in the lower world of the wilderness. However, once they were influenced by a priest, the strength of the mountain spirit tribe rapidly expanded. Today they could even fight against 4 people alone. The power of worship and belief of the Black Fire tribe had indeed appeared before. After the chief ghost I explained, the other 2 tribal chiefs immediately understood. But understanding was one thing, but they still looked at Lu Chen in disbelief. That was a human. In the long history of the southern wilderness, there had never been a non-barbarian priest or shaman. But no one had ever said that the priest and shaman couldn't be a foreigner. A human was going to become a priest of the barbarian tribe? The few leaders and the barbarian warriors behind them, who were starting to understand the situation, even the barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe, all had their mouths wide open in shock. Lu Chen had also heard it himself. After understanding the meaning behind this matter, even though his temperament was much calmer than an ordinary person, he could not help but be greatly shocked. His gaze landed on the back of the abnormally tall and sturdy Huayan. Obviously, this chief warrior of the Black Fire tribe had thought of all these in a short period of time. Then, he decided to use all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe to fight against the other 3 tribes without any hesitation. Even Lu Chen himself felt that it was a little inconceivable. At this moment, Huayan, who was being stared at by everyone, had a serious expression on his face. However, his expression was firm and he had no intention of backing down. He only said in a low voice, "Whether he is a priest or not, I don't know. This is up to the Black Fire tribe's chief to decide." But what appeared just now was the power of the fire god of our Black Fire tribe. No matter what, I must bring this person back. Whether he lives or dies will be decided by the chief. The other 3 tribes looked at each other, and the chiefs frowned. At the same time, the barbarian warriors seemed to have unknowingly spread out, gradually surrounding the Black Fire tribe. Huayan's expression became even colder. He stared at the 3 chiefs and shouted, "Do you really want to fight to the death with the Black Fire tribe?" The 3 barbarian chiefs also looked hesitant. They looked at each other, then walked together and began to discuss in low voices. Actually, based on their current strength, none of the tribes had any priests. With 3 tribes against 1, the Black Fire tribe would definitely have the upper hand. But if the Black Fire tribe fought to the death, the 3 tribes would inevitably suffer some additional losses. The life of every barbarian warrior was precious. Although they could fight to the death for the tribe, as a chief, they could not easily waste the lives of the warriors under them. Otherwise, the great ancestors of the tribe would curse them, and they would forever be despised by the tribe, and their souls would never be able to return to peace. While the other 3 tribes were discussing, the atmosphere between the barbarian warriors suddenly became even more tense. Although Huayan's attitude seemed to be abnormally firm, in fact, his forehead and back were faintly covered in cold sweat. He only felt that his heart was abnormally heavy, as if there was a huge stone pressing down on it. Although the warriors of the Black Fire tribe would not question his decision, he himself had to think more. Was it really worth it for such a human? Cough, cough, cough. Just when the atmosphere was a little stiff, Huayan suddenly heard a light cough coming from behind him. The sound sounded a little strange. Huayan was startled for a moment. He turned around and saw that it was Lu Chen looking at him and giving him a look. Huayan was silent for a moment, then quietly took 2 steps back and came to Lu Chen's side. His body was considered tall and burly among the barbarian warriors. At this moment, when Lu Chen stood beside him, he looked like a child who had just grown up. Huayan lowered his voice, his expression slightly strange and complicated. He said in a low voice, "What do you want?" Chapter 290. Ordering the Black Fire tribe's barbarian warriors to hand over their loot was like seeing a starving dog and ordering it to spit out the bones it had painstakingly snatched. Most of the barbarian warriors in the surroundings didn't move after hearing the shout of their leader. They all widened their eyes and looked at Huayan as if they were looking at a madman. At the same time, some of the Black Fire tribe's warriors looked at Huayan with hostility, but not at Huayan, who had gone through life and death with them. Instead, They looked at Lu Chen, the instigator of all this. They clenched their weapons tightly, looking as if they wanted to hack him to death. The barbarians were strong and fierce, and most of the warriors were simple-minded. Therefore, even when facing Huayan, they would show a bit of dissatisfaction. But no matter what, Huayan was still the chief. Seeing the expressions of the people around him, he also became angry. However, there was no such thing as tactful persuasion among the barbarians, so he directly chose the most common and most direct method. Go to hell! The tall and fierce barbarian cursed loudly. He kicked a barbarian warrior who was standing closest to him. Then, he took a step forward, and used his huge palms to smash anyone he saw. If he didn't like them, he would kick them. Along the way, the barbarians were thrown off their feet. The barbarians roared and roared continuously. The other barbarians who didn't know what was going on were stunned, and looked at each other in dismay. Under the pressure of Huayan, all the Black Fire Tribe's warriors seemed to have become listless. With sullen faces, they obediently handed over the loot they had just obtained. In the blink of an eye, there was a huge pile of loot on the ground. Lu Chen looked at this scene from the side. He had a whole new level of respect for Huayan. He could tell that this person should be a person of great prestige in the Black Fire Tribe. So many fierce warriors actually didn't dare to make a sound in front of him. Not long after, almost all the loot from the Black Fire Tribe was piled up on the ground. Huayan's expression didn't look too good. No matter what, these bones were his own. He didn't feel good about throwing them away. Normally, he wouldn't do this even if he was beaten to death. But at this moment, things were different. As the leader of the tribe, his vision was much better than those subordinates who only knew how to fight, rob, and roar. This mysterious human possessed the power of black flames. In that instant, Huayan felt as if he had been blessed by his ancestors. He firmly believed that he had not done anything wrong. These things are for you. We have helped you in this battle for nothing. Let us go. Huayan stood in front of the pile of spoils of war. His expression was steely, and he seemed to be gnashing his teeth as he spoke. The three leaders on the opposite side were shocked. Therefore, a large group of people from the Thunder Lizard tribe were desperately fighting for the things on the ground. It looked like a group of dogs fighting for meat and bones. They didn't even look at the people of the Ghost Eye tribe. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe flew into a rage and cursed loudly. He looked back at the retreating people of the Black Fire tribe and the tall and fierce figure. After hesitating for a while, he finally sighed and didn't chase after them. If he chased after them now, without the help of the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Divine Wood tribe, it would be equivalent to the Ghost Eye tribe fighting against the Black Fire tribe. Not to mention the fact that the outcome was uncertain. Even if the Ghost Eye tribe won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. At that time, they would inexplicably lose the lives of more than half of the warriors of the tribe. If they couldn't destroy the Black Fire tribe, they would definitely have a blood feud with them. Most importantly, the Black Fire tribe had already King thrown out most of the things they had seized. Even if the Ghost Eye tribe won this battle, they wouldn't get many benefits. How could they fight this battle? No matter how they looked at it, they were at a disadvantage. There were many barbarians in the southern wilderness who risked their lives for revenge. But if the leader of a tribe was like that, his tribe would have been destroyed long ago. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe hadn't encountered such a depressing situation for a long time. He looked at the backs of the people of the Black Fire tribe gradually getting further and further away, and then looked at the two tribes behind him who were still gloating. The leader of the Ghost Eye tribe looked up to the sky and sighed. "Priests, those are priests," he said with a sad face. "A bunch of idiots." Chapter 291. After safely leaving the sand dune and the battlefield, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe led Lu Chen and Atsu into the depths of the wilderness. Along the way, the atmosphere of the entire team was very stiff. Every time, there would be malicious gazes directed at Lu Chen, as if they wanted to devour this weak human. Lu Chen was relatively calm about this. Perhaps he was just hiding his true thoughts in his heart. However, Atu's reaction was much more direct. He was very sensitive to the hostile gazes around him. Every time someone looked at him, he would grit his teeth and stare back angrily. He looked like he was about to devour someone. Strangely, despite Atsu's ferocious demeanor, the barbarian warriors were not angry at all. They looked at Lu Chen with disgust, But when they saw Atsu, their expressions changed. Most of them were actually appreciative. Some even pointed at Atsu and nodded, praising the ferocity of this black wolf. It could be considered as the best demon beast in the wilderness. It was a pity that the heavens were blind, and such a good beast had been taken in by a piece of trash. While saying such contemptuous words and glancing at the disdainful gazes, everyone revealed a look of regret and pain. This caused Lu Chen to be speechless as he quietly observed the situation around him, and at the same time secretly pondering how to escape. After walking for about 2 hours, the Black Fire Tribe's team rested in a boxwood forest unique to the wilderness. This type of boxwood had a very strange appearance. At first glance, it looked very haggard, and the branches were also bare. At most, there were a few yellow leaves, and it looked like it was about to wither. But in fact, this kind of tree could survive in this desolate wilderness for thousands of years with this pitiful appearance. During this break, Hua Yan and Lu Chen had a conversation. Hua Yan asked about Lu Chen's background, and Lu Chen asked about where they were taking him. Hua Yan was probably not used to conversing with Lu Chen in such a polite manner, especially since Lu Chen did not answer him honestly. Instead, he asked many questions in return. There were a few times when Lu Chen clearly felt that the burly and fierce barbarian had the urge to go berserk, roar, and punch and kick to increase his power. Judging from the way the surrounding barbarian warriors quietly retreated, Lu Chen's feelings seemed to be right. But for some unknown reason, Hua Yan, this seemingly violent and ferocious barbarian, actually managed to suppress his violent temper in this first formal conversation with Lu Chen. Not only did he not touch a single hair on Lu Chen's head, he even answered all of Lu Chen's questions. From this, Lu Chen learned that the Black Fire Tribe was indeed a great tribe with a glorious history. In the vast wasteland of the southern border, among the countless barbarian tribes, only 7 of the strongest tribes had ever produced a supreme expert like the shaman. Without exception, all of them had mastered the most powerful source of power in the southern barbarian witchcraft. And the Black Fire Tribe was one of them. The shaman that once appeared in the Black Fire Tribe was respectfully called the Fire Shaman. When Lu Chen heard the words, Fire Shaman, his heart was filled with an indescribable feeling of absurdity. It was as if he suddenly saw fate smiling evilly at him. However, his many years as a shadow allowed him to hide this strange and indescribable feeling in his heart, not revealing it. And when Hua Yan asked him about his origins, Lu Chen did not hesitate too much. He very naturally and smoothly told the barbarian leader that he was adventuring in the disorienting lands a few days ago, and accidentally found a dilapidated village in the depths of the disorienting lands. Of course, there was a barbarian village inside, and he coincidentally obtained the Vulcan staff at that time. When Lu Chen said this, he also recalled the layout of the village to Hua Yan, as well as some of the totems and patterns that he remembered being drawn all over the village. When he heard this, Hua Yan was so excited that he could not help but stand up. Not only him, but the surrounding warriors also gathered around, their faces filled with disbelief. Some of them were so excited that their bodies were trembling slightly. Unfortunately, Lu Chen did not give these barbarian warriors too much hope. He very definitely told them that everyone in the village had died. And in a moment of compassion, he took care of and fed the dying old shaman a few mouthfuls of water. The old shaman gave him half a wooden staff and said that it was called the Vulcan staff. He asked him to bring it back to the southern wilderness and return it to the Vulcan. Halfway through his speech, Hua Yan and the surrounding barbarian warriors of the Black Fire Tribe were so excited that they could not control themselves. The original suspicion on their faces had disappeared in an instant. When they heard Lu Chen's words, especially when they heard that the old shaman still struggled to urge Lu Chen to bring the Vulcan staff back to the wilderness, the warriors of the Black Fire Tribe all burst into tears. Some growled, some roared, some wailed, and some even pounded their chests, kneeled on the ground, banging their heads on the ground. They did not even realize that they were bleeding. The onlookers were all trembling, as if they had committed a grave mistake and could not control themselves. Among the crowd, even Hua Yan, who seemed to be the calmest and most composed, had tears in his eyes. His body trembled as he slowly turned to face the north. Looking at the endless land and the vast sky, he knelt on the ground with a thud and pounded his hands on the ground. He mumbled incomprehensibly, choking with sobs. Looking at the large group of barbarian warriors who were behaving strangely and weeping, Lu Chen was once again speechless. Although he did not know the history of the Black Fire Tribe, but from the looks of it, It was clear that the small barbarian village that was destroyed was inextricably linked to the Black Fire tribe. As for why these barbarians were so agitated, he did not know. After a long while, the surrounding barbarian warriors slowly returned to normal. But many of them still had expressions of sadness and pain on their faces, and their eyes were red. But to be honest, with the ferocious appearance of the barbarians, at this moment, they did not look sad at all. Instead, they looked even more ferocious, like beasts with red eyes after being angered. After this torment, not only Hua Yan, but even the barbarian warriors who originally hated Lu Chen looked at Lu Chen with much friendlier eyes. There was no longer so much hostility, as if the distance between them had suddenly been shortened. But compared to the other simple-minded Black Fire tribe warriors, Hua Yan, the leader, was obviously more intelligent. In his excitement, he still remembered to ask Lu Chen. For thousands of years, no human has been able to cross the land of chaos to reach the southern wilderness. So, how did you get here? This question was not easy to answer. He definitely could not tell the truth. That seed was Lu Chen's biggest secret. Therefore, Lu Chen could only make up a story. He only said that after burying the old priest, he left the village. Not long after, he was chased by ferocious beasts and fell into the terrifying Dragon River. In the middle of it, he encountered an even more ferocious and unimaginably terrifying giant beast in the river, and was knocked unconscious. He thought that he would definitely die, but before he fainted, he vaguely felt that half of the fire god's staff suddenly lit up, and a mysterious light enveloped his whole body. After that, he did not know. When he woke up, he was already in the southern wilderness. What happened next was that he accidentally saw the battle between the four tribes. There were many flaws in this story, but to the Black Fire tribe, it was surprisingly effective. They almost immediately believed it without a doubt. With Hua Yan as the leader, the barbarian warriors immediately knelt down, and then made a strange but solemn salute to the sky, loudly praising the supreme glory and power of the fire god. Lu Chen stood at the side and silently looked at this tribe that believed in the fire god. Suddenly, he thought of the fanatics of the Three Realms demonic cult that he had seen in the vast land of the Divine Land. Although the races were different and the things that they believed in were completely different, at this moment, in Lu Chen's mind, their figures actually overlapped. In this life, Lu Chen had never believed in any gods. If he did not have such an unwavering belief, he would have long collapsed in the demonic cult. At this moment, he naturally had no respect for the so-called fire god. He just subconsciously felt that it was a little strange. At the same time, since he came to the southern wilderness, it seemed that everything was too coincidental. After getting the fire god's staff, he encountered a tribe that had the inheritance of the Black Fire tribe. If it were not for his strong will, if it were someone else, they might really suspect that all this was arranged by that god. For the rest of the journey, many warriors of the Black Fire tribe were much more polite to Lu Chen. They no longer looked at him with hostility. Instead, they often looked at him with reverence. Lu Chen knew why. Because he often saw the barbarian warriors looking at the fire god's staff in his hand with the same kind of gaze. That should be the artifact that belonged to the fire god, right? Hua Yan once asked him to check the fire god's staff, and Lu Chen gave it to him. Hua Yan took it carefully, and after rubbing it repeatedly, it could be seen that he wanted to use his own power to activate the fire god's staff, so that it would show the powerful Black Fire god's miracle. But unfortunately, the fire god seemed to ignore him, and the fire god's staff did not respond. At this moment, Hua Yan seemed to have suddenly become smarter. He actually shamelessly called all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe together and tried it out one by one. The Black Fire tribe was the tribe that admired the fire god the most. They were the direct descendants of the fire god's power, so there would definitely be people that were favored by the fire god. No one said anything about this. However, in this subtle atmosphere, if there really was someone who was favored by the fire god, that humans seemed to be dispensable after completing the mission of returning the fire god. Chapter 292. Gods were aloof, temperamental, unpredictable, mysterious, and ethereal. For so many years, gods that almost no one had ever seen were said to have the greatest requirement for their worshippers to be obedient. As long as they were obedient, there was no need to guess the actions of the gods. Because you would never guess. For example, the fire god was an ancient god that only the Black Fire tribe worshipped. All of his worshippers were in this tribe, while the human race was thousands of miles away. But at this critical moment, The fire god seemed to have abandoned his most loyal worshippers. The fire god's staff did not react to any of the barbarian warriors of the fire god tribe, even if they used all kinds of methods, including the methods passed down from ancient times. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe were all gritting their teeth and sweating profusely, but in the end, they did not succeed. Lu Chen stood at the side and looked at this scene coldly. For a moment, he was puzzled. In his hand, the fire god's staff would only react when he used the power of the black fire. This was probably because the two came from the same source. However, that was the extent of his understanding of the fire god's staff. Looking at the sorry state of the Black Fire tribe warriors, he started to have more doubts about the fire god. A god didn't believe in his own believers and people, and instead favored an unrelated person? This matter really didn't make sense no matter how he explained it. After a while, Hua Yan walked over awkwardly and returned the fire god's staff to Lu Chen. Lu Chen thought for a moment, but did not take it. Instead, he said to him, "You should be able to tell that I am not a priest." Hua Yan was startled, and his face turned serious. He said in a low voice, "Why?" Lu Chen pointed at the fire god's staff and said, "If this fire god's staff is a treasure of your tribe, then you can take it back. There is no need to give it to me." Hua Yan didn't expect Lu Chen to say this and was momentarily stunned. He heard Lu Chen continue, "I've already told you what happened before. Although I don't know why the fire god you mentioned chose me, since I've returned the fire god's staff to you, I think I've completed my mission." He looked at Hua Yan and calmly said, "Take this treasure back. I don't want it. Then, I'll leave this place myself. What do you think?" Hua Yan's expression changed. Some of the barbarian warriors nearby who heard their conversation were also stunned. However, after pondering silently for a moment, Hua Yan looked around at the barbarian warriors and shook his head. He stuffed the fire god's staff into Lu Chen's hands and said, "This won't do. Since the fire god has chosen you, he must have his reasons." As he spoke, he turned to the surrounding black fire warriors and said loudly, "I've thought about it. The reason why we were unable to reignite the fire god's staff is because we committed a huge mistake in the past. The fire god still wants to punish us." Whew! There was a commotion among the warriors, but when Lu Chen looked over, many of them had a look of sudden understanding and nodded their heads, as if they had been woken up by Hua Yan's words. Then, when they looked at Lu Chen's side again, their faces were filled with respect. It really seemed like they were looking at a priest. Lu Chen felt somewhat helpless. Just as he was about to say something, Hua Yan had already turned around and pulled Lu Chen back without batting an eyelid. Lu Chen understood and followed him to a secluded area where there were fewer people. Hua Yan said in a low voice, "Lu Chen, I don't care about your background or identity. But you can clearly see the current situation. Since you're here, follow me back to the tribe. At the very least, you have to meet our tribe leader. When that time comes, we'll listen to the tribe leader's decision." "Tribe leader?" Lu Chen frowned. Hua Yan nodded his head in response. Then he slowed down and said in a low voice, "You're after all a human, not a barbarian. In this southern wilderness, only our Black Fire tribe has no enmity towards you and can protect you a little. If you leave, once people from other tribes see you, there will immediately be a bloodbath. Unless you leave the wilderness, otherwise, there will be no end." He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Even if you have some ability, but if this goes on, there will be a day when you can't hold on." Lu Chen was silent, but in his heart, he had to admit that this seemingly rough and fierce barbarian's words were indeed very reasonable. The way back was blocked by the Great Snow Mountain and the abyss of primal chaos. The Great River of the Dragon River was even more dangerous. With his current ability, it was impossible for him to cross it. Not to mention that apart from the strange black fire in his body, his original Tao techniques and divine arts were almost completely crippled due to the chaos of the 5 elemental spiritual energies. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, Lu Chen sighed and nodded, "All right." The Black Fire tribe's location was not too far from them. They arrived at the tribe's location in the evening. Under the dim night sky, Lu Chen saw from afar that the Black Fire tribe's camp was actually built on flat ground without any cover. There were some stones piled up around it as a wall, which could barely be considered as a defense. But looking at the height of the stone wall, it was estimated that it could only defend against some small beasts passing by in the wilderness. If there were really enemies, It would be useless. They could only rely on the tribe's warriors to fight with their flesh and blood. It was probably because of this that the elite warriors of the Black Fire tribe didn't dare to leave their tribe too far. The battlefield couldn't be more than a day's journey away from their tribe. They were afraid that if something happened to the tribe, it would be too late for them to rush back. Probably hearing the movements of the Black Fire tribe's warriors returning, there was a sudden commotion in the originally quiet Black Fire tribe. Then, many barbarians ran out and welcomed them. Suddenly, there were cheers and shouts at the entrance of the camp. Many women and children who stayed behind to guard the camp finally saw the people they wanted to see after being on tenterhooks for a long time. For a moment, there were all kinds of hugs and laughter, showing that even the fierce and barbaric barbarians had a human side. In this process, Lu Chen suddenly realized something that he had neglected before. Everyone was smiling. Until he walked into the camp, he did not see anyone crying or wailing in sorrow. At most, there were people who were injured and were asked about their well-being. This meant that in that fierce battle, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe seemed to have not suffered any losses, and actually managed to escape unscathed. For a moment, Lu Chen could not help but look at the tribal warriors in a new light. At that time, he hid on the hill and watched the battle below. The tragic scene was still fresh in his memory. Now, it seemed that although the Black Fire tribe seemed to be in a difficult and unfavorable situation, to be able to struggle and survive in such a harsh wasteland, they had their own unique qualities. While Lu Chen was secretly observing these barbarians, the people of the Black Fire tribe also began to notice that there was suddenly a stranger with a strange appearance among the returning troops. His appearance was very different from that of a barbarian. Very soon, someone thought of the legendary human race of the north, and immediately, someone cried out in surprise. This cry alarmed even more people. In a moment, many barbarians of the Black Fire tribe surrounded him. Most of them were women and children. The women were very cautious and kept a distance from Lu Chen, but the barbarian children were unscrupulous. Many of them came closer to look at Lu Chen, shouting excitedly. Some of the bolder ones even stretched out their legs to kick him. It seemed that the education of the Black Fire tribe was very bad for the human race. There were even some who pulled out palm-sized knives and stabbed at him while screaming. This behavior immediately shocked the barbarian warriors who escorted Lu Chen back. Although Lu Chen was a human, the fire god liked him. In an instant, more than a dozen barbarian warriors surrounded them, scolding and scolding, chasing away those reckless brats. Among them, the most conspicuous one was Hua Yan's tall and sturdy body. The leader of the barbarian warriors jumped over and directly grabbed the tallest and strongest child, who was also the only one who pulled out a knife and was about to stab someone. He slapped the child to the ground, then grabbed one of the child's legs and lifted him up. The child was not afraid of him, and was still struggling in mid-air. He held the knife and waved it at Lu Chen, shouting, "Let me go, let me chop off his head and put it on the roof of father's house." Hua Yan's face darkened as he cursed. He stretched out his hand and tossed the little boy away. The child fell to the ground and rolled a few times, but his skin was surprisingly sturdy. He flipped over and jumped up again, still cursing and shouting, "Father, why didn't you let me kill him? Isn't he a human?" "Shut up!" Hua Yan scolded, then signaled Lu Chen to follow him. Lu Chen and Atsu followed behind him, walking deeper into the tribe. At this moment, when everyone saw this scene, they naturally knew that Lu Chen's identity was somewhat different from others, so they did not say anything. Only the child still looked very fierce, staring at Lu Chen with an unconvinced expression. When they walked past the child, Lu Chen glanced at him, and saw that the child was still trying his best to show a fierce expression, glaring at him fiercely. He could not help but laugh and said to Hua Yan, "Your son?" Hua Yan coughed and said, "An idiot." The child was furious, but did not dare to get angry at his father. Instead, he pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, "I'm not an idiot, let me fight him one-on-one. Watch me chop off his head and put it on father's." "Shut up." Hua Yan's nose was almost crooked from anger, and he said angrily, "The others are all fine, only you keep shouting, what are you doing?" At this moment, they came to the front of a large stone house, and a slightly hunched figure walked out from the dark house. The child immediately seemed to have met his savior, jumping over and grabbing that person's hand, shouting, "Grandpa, Grandpa, look at father, he won't let me kill this hateful human." Chapter 293. Lu Chen raised his eyes and looked at the old man. At first glance, he felt that he looked somewhat familiar. Of course, it was absolutely impossible for him to have met this old barbarian who had spent his entire life in the southern wilderness. After carefully sizing him up for a moment, Lu Chen knew where that strange feeling came from. From the outline of his face, the old barbarian's facial features were somewhat similar to Hua Yan's. However, Hua Yan was in the prime of his life, and his energy, qi, and spirit were all at their peak, giving off a ferocious and valiant aura. On the other hand, it was hard to tell the age of this old barbarian, but he was obviously very old. Not only was his body hunched, his face was also lethargic, and a few large age spots had appeared on his thin face, making him look somewhat gloomy. Other than making people think that these two should be father and son, Lu Chen also thought of another barbarian. It was the one that he and Xian had seen in the Demon Flower Valley at the periphery of the disorienting lands. He was the cruel and vicious old barbarian who had been banished by the tribe because of his old age. It was probably because both of them were very old, and in the eyes of humans, barbarians all looked the same and were equally fierce. However, the old barbarian who was killed by Lu Chen was killed because the environment in the disorienting lands was too harsh, causing the tribe there to adopt the terrifying practice of banishing the elderly. Although the southern wilderness also looked desolate, the conditions here were obviously much better than in the disorienting lands. At least when Lu Chen walked into the camp of the Black Fire tribe, he saw many old barbarians. However, when the old barbarian looked at Lu Chen and heard Hua Yan call him father, and the other barbarian warriors saluted him and called him chief, Lu Chen suddenly frowned. The old chief of the Black Fire tribe had a very heavy aura of lethargy. Even the dying old priest of the barbarian tribe in the disorienting lands looked more spirited than him. Human. Although the old barbarian looked very old, when his grandson grabbed his hand, he still showed a happy and gratified smile. However, after listening to the boy's complaint, the old barbarian raised his head and looked at Lu Chen. His expression immediately changed, and a look of shock appeared on his face as he let out a cry. Hua Yan, who was at the side, walked forward and whispered a few words into the old tribe leader's ear. The old barbarian was startled for a moment, but it seemed that he valued Hua Yan's son very much. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded and agreed. After that, the old barbarian turned around and walked back to his stone house. Hua Yan waved his hand at Lu Chen, indicating for him to enter with him. Lu Chen nodded his head and followed behind. Atsu followed behind him, but at the entrance, Hua Yan glanced at the gigantic black wolf demonic beast and said to Lu Chen, "Let it wait outside." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but still agreed. He rubbed Atsu's head and said, "Wait for me at the entrance, I'll come out in a moment." Atsu glanced at him, wagged its tail, and squatted down at the entrance. Then, Lu Chen and Hua Yan walked in. As soon as the figures of these people disappeared, the atmosphere in the Black Fire tribe became much more relaxed. Some of the relatives who had reunited with each other returned home, some stood together and laughed. Most of the children in the tribe were running around, showing a little bit of a happy atmosphere. Atsu looked at this unfamiliar place in boredom. Suddenly, a figure flashed in front of it. It was the boy who had spoken the loudest just now, Hua Yan's son. He stood in front of it with a scrutinizing look on his face. He looked at this gigantic demonic beast, which was rarely seen in the wilderness, with a hint of curiosity and passion in his eyes. Atsu snorted and barked a few times. He lifted his head warily and looked at the young berserker. After entering the stone house, Lu Chen looked around and found that the furnishings in the house were extremely simple. There was a wooden bed, a stone cabinet, and a piece of animal skin. That seemed to be all. In the middle of the house, there was a pit. There were a few charcoal fires burning in the pit, and 3 wooden supports were propped up on top of it. A black clay pot hung from it. From time to time, there would be a crackling sound coming from the pot. It was unknown what was being burned. This was the place where the tribe leader lived, but it was already so simple. It was easy to imagine the situation in other places. It seemed that the Black Fire tribe was not in a good situation. However, neither the old barbarian tribe leader nor Hua Yan had any reaction to this. They were probably used to it. After entering the house, the old tribe leader sat down at one end of the fire pit. Hua Yan let Lu Chen sit on the other side, and then he knelt down beside the old tribe leader. He began to tell the tribe leader, who was also his father, in detail about the beginning and process of this matter. During this time, he even motioned to Lu Chen and asked for the fire god's staff, handing it over to the old tribe leader for him to see. Lu Chen was silent, but his eyes were secretly observing the two barbarians. From their conversation, he found out that the old tribe leader was called Fire Tiger, an old and ferocious tiger. As the old fire tiger listened to his son Huayan's narration, his gaze occasionally swept past Lu Chen's face, and then looked at the fire god's staff in his hand. At this time, it was difficult to see any special emotions in his expression. Apart from the reverence that came from the bottom of his heart, there was also a reverence towards the legendary fire god. As Huayan continued to narrate, there was a faint trace of excitement on his face. This was because he had already begun to talk about the most important matter. He believed that Lu Chen was favored by the fire god, and that the fire god must have bestowed a gift to the Black Fire tribe. Therefore, he was the priest that the Black Fire tribe had dreamed of for many years. As long as they had a priest, the Black Fire tribe that had been weak for many years would have hoped to rise again. At this point, Huayan's voice even began to tremble. It was obvious that to him, this goal was the most important matter that he had thought about day and night. Compared to the excitement of his young and strong son, Huayan's expression was much calmer than his gratitude towards the fire god's gift. Perhaps it was because he had lived for a long time, but his thoughts were heavier. When he looked at Lu Chen, there was a heavy suspicion in his eyes. Lu Chen could see this, but it didn't matter. He had never really thought of becoming this priest of the Black Fire tribe. He wouldn't do it, and he didn't want to do it. At this moment, Lu Chen couldn't wait for the Fire Tiger tribe leader to give the order to chase him out. This way, everyone would have less trouble. When Huayan finally finished telling his father about the course of events and his lofty aspirations, the aged Fire Tiger pondered silently for a long time. He did not agree, nor did he object. Instead, he suddenly opened his mouth to ask Lu Chen, "Do you have anything to say?" Lu Chen glanced at him and sneered in his heart, but his expression did not change. He calmly said, "I have already told Huayan what I wanted to say. First, it was an accident that I came to the southern wilderness. I never thought of bringing the fire god staff here. Second, I have no intention of being a priest in the Black Fire tribe. As long as you allow me, I can leave now." He paused for a moment before continuing, "This fire god staff isn't of much use to me. If it really is an important treasure of the Black Fire tribe, I can keep it and give it to you." Originally, Flaming Tiger's expression was somewhat gloomy and tense. However, when he heard Lu Chen's last sentence, he was startled for a moment. Immediately after, his expression eased up a little. But Huayan, who was sitting beside him, was somewhat anxious. He said in a low voice, "Lu Chen, don't talk nonsense. All the coincidences that you came here were all arranged by the fire god. Moreover, apart from you, no one else can activate the power of the fire god's staff. All of this must be the fire god's decision to let you be our Black Fire tribe's priest." Lu Chen was somewhat speechless. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Looking at Huayan's serious expression, he didn't know what to say for a moment. Huayan also frowned. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head again. Using his withered palm, he gently stroked the fire god's staff. There was hesitation and contemplation on his face. Huayan, who was at the side, saw that his father seemed to be wavering. He immediately became somewhat anxious. Just as he was about to urgently persuade him again, suddenly at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the stone house. A roar was heard, followed by a series of exclamations from near and far. There was also a somewhat shrill scream mixed together. The three people in the stone house were all startled. Each of them had heard a familiar voice. The shrill scream belonged to Huayan's son, and the low and angry roar belonged to Atsu. As for the other cries of alarm, they belonged to the surrounding barbarians of the Black Fire tribe. Huayan and Lu Chen immediately stood up from the ground. After looking at each other, they immediately strode outside. While Huayan was also shocked, he followed them out of the house. Once outside, a horrifying scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Not far from the stone house, a huge black wolf was roaring and pouncing on the barbarian youth. At this moment, two of Atsu's huge front claws were pressed on the youth's shoulders. A terrifying bloody mouth with incomparably sharp, blade-like fangs had already stretched out towards the youth's throat. The youth was already so scared that his face had turned pale. His whole body was trembling slightly, but he seemed to still have some of the innate valiance of the barbarians. Surprisingly, he did not cry. Instead, he clenched his teeth and struggled with all his might. But under the suppression of this huge monster, it was completely useless. The surrounding barbarians turned pale with fright. Many warriors immediately pulled out their weapons, but they did not dare to approach. They were afraid that if they were not careful, they would accidentally anger this monster. The consequences would be unimaginable. Lu Chen's face slightly darkened, but he still rushed over and shouted, "Atsu, don't be reckless." Atsu turned its head and saw that it was Lu Chen. Its eyes slightly softened, but it still growled in a low voice. It seemed to be very angry. Hua Yan stood behind Lu Chen. His face was a little anxious, but he did not dare to act rashly. He could only watch as Lu Chen held Atsu's head and slowly comforted it. When Atsu calmed down, Hua Yan's face regained some calmness. He said in a low voice, "Let go of the child first." Chapter 294. Lu Chen glanced at him, then nodded. He held Atsu's head in his arms, hugged it tightly, and then slowly pulled it back. Atsu let out a low growl, seemingly unwilling, but seeing that Lu Chen's expression was especially resolute, it hesitated for a moment, then finally followed Lu Chen's lead and slowly retreated. Even its front paws slowly left the youth's shoulder. The surrounding Black Fire tribe members all widened their eyes, their expressions nervous. The youth didn't even dare to breathe loudly, afraid that he would suddenly startle this huge beast, and in the blink of an eye, it would be a bloody disaster. Seeing the huge black wolf slowly retreat a few feet under Lu Chen's advice, Hua Yan, who had been waiting on the side for a long time, suddenly rushed forward and pulled the youth up from the ground. Then, with a clean and neat roll, in the blink of an eye, they were already several feet away from the huge black wolf. The surrounding Black Fire tribe members immediately let out a cry of relief. Then, 7 or 8 warriors immediately held their swords and stood between the two sides, fiercely looking at Lu Chen and Atsu. Lu Chen frowned, but didn't say anything. On the other side, Hua Yan pulled the youth up, and the chief Hua who also came over. The two looked at the boy with concern and asked in unison, "Hua Ying, are you all right?" The barbarian youth called Hua Ying suddenly jumped up from the ground. The original fear on his face disappeared, and was replaced with shame and anger. He pointed at Atsu and shouted, "Dad, kill it, kill it!" Lu Chen's expression suddenly darkened, and Hua Yan frowned. Before he could say anything, Hua Ying had already run to Hua Hu's side, grabbed his hand and shouted, "Grandpa, this black wolf wants to kill me, it wants to kill me. I definitely won't let it go, kill it." Ever since it entered the Black Fire tribe, it didn't provoke anyone but you? The one who spoke was Lu Chen. His eyes were cold as he asked. Hua Yan frowned. He turned around to look at his son and asked, "What happened when we entered the house?" The fire hawk froze for a moment, then shook its head with a resolute expression, shouting, "I just saw that this black wolf looks pretty good, and I somewhat like it. I wanted to take it as a mount, but I didn't do anything else. Who knew that this beast would be so ferocious and almost killed me? If it wanted to kill you, you would be a dead man by now," Lu Chen said coldly. The fire hawk was speechless for a moment, and then he flew into a rage. He pointed at Lu Chen and roared, "You lowly human, how dare you speak to me like this? Kill him, kill him." As he spoke, he shouted at the barbarian warriors around him, as if he was used to ordering others around. The strong barbarian warriors standing at the side looked at each other. Most of them didn't move, but secretly glanced at Hua Yan and Hua Hu. Only 1 or 2 tall and simple-minded men let out a roar, drew their blades and ran out. "Stop!" A shout came from Hua Yan, stopping the two. Then, he looked to the side with a dark face, at the other people of the Black Fire tribe, and said loudly, "Did you all see what happened just now? Was it just like what the Fire Hawk said?" The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe that he looked at, whether they were the warriors, the old, the weak, the women or the children, none of them responded. Some of them even looked a little embarrassed. Hua Yan's face darkened even more. He pointed at a tall barbarian warrior with especially thick arms, and shouted, "Tai Xiong, you speak." The warrior called Tai Xiong rolled his eyes, looked at the Fire Hawk, then looked at Hua Yan, and said in a muffled voice, "It was Little Hawk who liked this black wolf and wanted to tame it. But the black wolf was too wild and refused." Little Hawk used the method we usually use to deal with wild wolves. He used a knife to stab it, but he was careless and was knocked down by the wolf. Huayan was furious. He turned to the Firehawk and scolded, "This black wolf has an owner, why did you touch it?" The Firehawk was a little scared after being scolded by Huayan. He shrank back a little, but an old hand reached out and hugged him, patting his shoulder comfortingly. It was his grandfather, Hua Hu. Huayan leaned on his grandfather, and his courage grew a lot. He straightened his neck and shouted, "That's just a lowly human. Sooner or later, we will kill him. Also, such a good black wolf is rare in the entire wasteland. Of course, we will take it into our tribe. If we can tame it in the future, it will be a great help to us." Nonsense! Huayan was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He took 2 steps forward and was about to slap him. But at this time, Hua Hu frowned and suddenly stretched out his hand to stop him. He then said indifferently, "Little Hawk is doing this for the good of the tribe. Isn't it just a demonic beast? It's no big deal." Huayan was startled and said in shock, "Father, this is Lu Chen's black wolf. And what Little Hawk is doing is wrong, how can he?" "Enough!" Hua Hu waved his hand and interrupted his son's words. His gaze turned to Lu Chen, who was standing side by side with the huge black wolf. A trace of haze flashed in the depths of his eyes. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "You can leave." "Father! Grandfather! Patriarch!" Several voices cried out at the same time, all of them filled with surprise. The only difference was that Huayan and the others had murderous looks on their faces, while Huayan was anxious. He hurriedly said to Hua Hu, "Father, have you forgotten what I said to you just now? This is very likely the will of the fire god. It is the fire god who has once again given our black fire tribe an opportunity, giving us a chance to rise and become strong again." "Just him?" This voice was a little immature and resentful. It was the teenager Huayan who interrupted. Obviously, he was still brooding over the humiliation he had just received. Lu Chen glanced at the teenager and smiled coldly, not saying a word. Huayan's anger rose and he shouted at Huayan, "Shut up!" Then he turned his head to Hua, lowered his voice, and earnestly said, "Father, don't you know how big the difference is between the tribes in the wasteland and whether they have priests or not? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We must not miss it." The expression on Hua Hu's withered and old face fluctuated. In the end, he still shook his head and said with a cold expression, "Lu Chen, you are originally a human. According to reason, if a person like you comes to our tribe, killing you is already giving you satisfaction. But for the sake of the fire god staff, we will let you go. You can go." Lu Chen replied with an "oh" and said, "Then I thank you very much." Hua Hu's face darkened. It seemed that he was very unhappy with Lu Chen's attitude of not thanking him and not kneeling down with his tail between his legs. However, he still endured it and coldly laughed dryly, saying, "As for the fire god staff, it is a divine weapon of our black fire tribe. It will stay with us." After saying this, he waved his hand and raised his voice, shouting, "Drive him out of the camp." Seeing his grandfather stand up for him and resolutely reject his father's unreliable suggestion, ordering him to chase this hateful human out of the tribe, Fire Eagle almost jumped up in joy. Although he was a little regretful that he could not kill this hateful human in front of everyone, he could still vent his anger. Hua Ying waved his fist and followed Hua Hu's shout, "Drive him out, drive him out. If this person dares to resist, kill him for me." Hua Hu, the chief of the Black Fire tribe who was standing next to him, suddenly froze, and his voice came to an abrupt halt. Hua Hu, the chief of the Black Fire tribe who was standing next to him, suddenly turned ashen. All the barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe, those fierce and valiant men who seemed to be able to fight a demon beast on their own, actually did not stand up at this moment. Almost everyone stood in place, including the 2 people who wanted to rush out to vent Hua Ying's anger. The eyes of every tribal warrior were secretly looking at Hua Yan. The atmosphere of the entire Black Fire tribe instantly became cold and silent. Except for Hua Yan, almost all the barbarians' faces changed slightly, whether it was the warriors or the old, weak women and children who were watching from the side. This was a scene that had never happened in the Black Fire tribe before. In the past, Hua Hu and Hua Yan were father and son. One was the chief, while the other was the chief of the warriors. Hua Yan was almost naturally recognized as the future chief. Everything seemed to come naturally, and everything seemed so smooth and natural. Until today, on this seemingly normal day, because of the sudden appearance of the human, the conflict between the father and son was suddenly placed in front of all the people of the Black Fire tribe. Then, the situation suddenly changed in an unexpected and strange way. All the warriors, even without any orders, all looked at Hua Yan in unison, even if the chief, Hua Hu, had publicly issued an order. Hua Yan seemed to feel nothing, coldly standing in the middle of the tribe's camp, not saying a word. He did not move, and all the warriors looked at each other. Surprisingly, no one moved. The atmosphere slowly became tense. Who knew how many people's heartbeats slowly sped up? Fire Eagle tightly grabbed his grandfather Fire Tiger's palm. He felt his heart suddenly beat so fast that it was frightening, thumping non-stop. At the same time, he suddenly felt that his grandfather's hand was as cold as ice. He secretly looked at his grandfather, only to see that this old man, who had been the chief of the Black Fire tribe for many years, was slowly looking around with an ashen face. His gaze swept across the faces of the Black Fire warriors. Every time he saw a Black Fire warrior, that person's gaze would be averted. Perhaps it was because of guilt, or perhaps it was because of nervousness. No one was willing to look him in the eye. But what made people despair was that even though he seemed to still have some prestige, not a single Black Fire warrior obeyed his orders. The old tiger had lost its claws, lost its fangs. In the end, it no longer had the power of the past. Hua Hu finally retracted his gaze and looked at the center of the crowd, at the man who was as majestic as a mountain. Hua Yan raised his eyes and looked at his father. The gazes of the father and son met in mid-air. It was as if there was a sudden explosion of thunder in the silence. Chapter 295. Hua Yan's tall and sturdy body was like a small mountain standing in the middle of the Black Fire tribe. At this moment, countless gazes were fixed on him. Everyone held their breath. Everyone had a feeling that this man's next decision and action might decide the future of the Black Fire tribe. This was a sudden situation that no one had expected. Hua Yan's uncharacteristic silence also intensified the tense atmosphere. Father and son, the old chief and the young chief, seemed to be confronting each other. After an unknown amount of time, Hua Yan's body suddenly moved. The surrounding people of the Black Fire tribe were startled. Then they saw Hua Yan stride forward, still maintaining his silence. His eyes looked forward, but he was slowly walking towards the old Hua Hu. At this moment, countless Black Fire tribe barbarians changed their expressions. Even the brave warriors became nervous. Among them, the one who had the most drastic change in expression was Hua Ying. Hua Hu's grandson, Hua Yan's son, and regarded as the third-generation chief of the Black Fire tribe, had a look of terror on his face. With a loud shout, he stood in front of his grandfather, Hua Hu, and opened his arms to look at his father. He cried out in fear, "Father, are you crazy? What do you want?" The southern wilderness was a harsh place. Most of the barbarian tribes that lived here didn't have a good time. The warriors of each tribe were famous for their fierceness. But this didn't mean that these barbarians were all simple-minded, united, and friendly people. The killing between the barbarian tribes was extremely cruel, and it was not uncommon for the same tribe to kill each other. Not to mention fighting within the same tribe, even killing between blood relatives was common. Compared to the other tribes that had internal strife, the Black Fire tribe had always been united for many years. After all, ever since they fled back to the wilderness after the 1,000-Year War, the tribe had been weak. Now, they could only struggle and live at the bottom of the wilderness. They did not have the capital to fight amongst themselves. If they did not unite, they would have been completely exterminated long ago. However, was this situation going to change today? As Hua Yan's heavy footsteps came closer and closer, Firehawk felt more and more pressure. Ever since he was young, he had worshipped and revered his father. Especially after his mother's early death, Hua Yan's nurturing of his son was completely from the perspective of a tribal warrior. Firehawk's greatest wish was to be qualified to take over his father's position in the future, and lead the Black Fire tribe to continue surviving in the southern wilderness. If it was possible, he would make the tribe even stronger, kill even more enemies, and seize even more things. This was the Fire Eagle's current dream. In the tribe, the one who doted on him the most was his grandfather, Fire Tiger. Firehawk had never thought that one day, his grandfather, who doted on him the most, might actually have a conflict with the father he respected the most. He stood in front of his grandfather in a daze, not knowing what to do. He looked at the tall figure of his father who was already standing in front of him in horror. His body began to tremble slightly, but even now, he still had no intention of leaving. The young man clenched his teeth and gasped for breath. He forced himself to stand between the two closest relatives in the world and opened his arms, wanting to stop them from really starting a conflict. Hua Yan's gaze left his father Fire Tiger's face and lowered his head to look at his son. The young man's face was very much like his own, stubbornness with a hint of fierceness and a hint of pleading in his eyes. With an expressionless face, he stretched out his hand and with a paw sound, Firehawk cried out in fear and staggered to the side. In the next moment, there was finally no more obstruction between Hua Yan and Fire Tiger. The two generations of Black Fire Tribe chiefs finally stood face to face. The Black Fire Tribe was deathly silent, as if even the drop of a needle could be heard. Unlike the faintly frightened expressions of the surrounding Black Fire Tribe barbarians, including his grandson Fire Eagle, the old Fire Tiger, although his expression was stern from beginning to end, did not show the slightest hint of fear. On the contrary, as he looked at this tall and burly son who was slowly approaching him, a strange light quietly flashed across the depths of his eyes. Perhaps it was because he was too old and had experienced too much, but this old man had long seen through everything. He had let go of life and death, so he was no longer afraid. Or perhaps, he was just a simple barbarian, simple and pure. Thus, everyone heard Fire Tiger speak first. He asked Hua Yan, "What do you want?" Hua Yan looked straight into his father's eyes. At that moment, his heart seemed to suddenly throb. Many years ago, when he was also a young man, he looked up to his father just like Fire Eagle did now. Perhaps even his childhood wish was exactly the same. But, who could imagine what would happen many years later? Even barbarians could not predict their lives. Hua Yan lowered his head slightly. After a moment he said in a low voice, "Give me the Fire God's staff." Fire Tiger's expression finally changed. He stared at Hua Yan for a moment, then handed over the Fire God's staff. At the same time he said indifferently, "What, you want the position of tribe leader?" In the barbarian tribe, other than the priest who was known as the soul of the tribe, or the higher-ranking shaman, the most important people in the tribe were usually the tribe leader and the chief. The tribe leader was the leader of the tribe, overseeing the overall situation. The chief was usually the commander of the tribe's warriors, leading the warriors to fight to the death. He was the strongest military commander in the tribe, and his position in the tribe was only below the tribe leader. For many years, the tradition of the Black Fire Tribe had been passed down by the son after the death of the father. The father was the tribe leader, and the son became the chief of the warriors. Under the gaze of all the Black Fire Tribe barbarians, Hua Yan reached out and took the Fire God's staff. The half of the staff, known as the Fire God's divine weapon, lay quietly in his palm. He looked at his father Fire Tiger and shook his head, saying, "You think too much." He paused for a moment then said, "I will send him away." After saying these two sentences, the tall and majestic barbarian turned around and strode in front of Lu Chen, saying, "Let's go." Lu Chen had seen everything that had happened between the father and son. At this moment, he could not understand what Hua Yan was thinking. But no matter what, leaving the Black Fire Tribe was obviously a good thing for him, so Lu Chen did not hesitate and agreed. Then, he brought Atsu and followed behind Hua Yan, slowly walking out of the Black Fire Tribe's camp. At this moment, the people of the Black Fire Tribe seemed to be able to catch their breath. Suddenly, there was an uproar, and many people began to whisper among themselves. At the same time, there were many people who secretly glanced at Hua Yan. Hua Yan turned a blind eye to these gazes. His pair of old and muddy eyes only stared at the backs of Hua Yan and Lu Chen. Even when Hua Ying came over to support him, Hua Yan did not have much of a reaction. Hua Ying was a little scared, and called out in a low voice, "Grandpa!" Hua Yan suddenly grabbed Hua Ying's hand tightly. Hua Ying's body trembled, and he suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. He suddenly realized that this seemingly old grandfather of his was shockingly strong. And just as he was shocked, he heard a low and hoarse voice. It was Hua Yan, using a voice that only he could hear, saying, "Follow him and watch carefully. Don't let your father leave." Hua Ying subconsciously agreed. Then Hua Ying let go of his hand, turned around, and walked back to his stone house. The dark shadow swallowed his figure in the house, making people unable to see this old man for a moment. The surrounding barbarians of the Black Fire tribe also began to slowly disperse. An internal strife that could have been a huge upheaval was resolved just like that. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Hence, no one paid any more attention to the Fire Hawks. Hua Ying lowered his head, and while no one was paying attention, he began to walk towards the entrance of the tribe's camp. At the same time, he suddenly thought of what his grandfather had just said. It was somewhat inexplicable, and he must have said something wrong. That human was very suspicious. Of course, he couldn't let him go so easily. According to Hua Ying's idea, it would be best to kill him directly. Chapter 296. The sky had unknowingly darkened, and the day was about to pass. The two people standing outside the Black Fire tribe, Hua Yan and Lu Chen, looked completely out of place. Their postures and expressions were completely different from each other. One of them was a ferocious, tall and ferocious-looking barbarian, while the other was a calm, reserved and composed human. Even Atsu, the huge black wolf demonic beast that was squatting beside Lu Chen, seemed to be more compatible with the barbarian Hua Yan than with the human Lu Chen. The two looked at each other for a while, and neither spoke. Finally, it was Lu Chen who sighed and said, "Do you have any plans now?" Hua Yan's face no longer showed the anger from before, and he looked much calmer. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "I still believe that you are a priest sent by the fire god to save our Black Fire tribe." Lu Chen shrugged his shoulders and said, "Looks like your tribe doesn't believe me." Hua Yan said expressionlessly, "One day they will believe me." As he said this, he frowned and said, "I remember you once said that when the old priest gave you the fire god staff, he told you to bring this divine weapon back to the wilderness and deliver it to the fire god altar?" Lu Chen wanted to say something, but stopped. A hint of vigilance flashed across his eyes and he said, "What do you mean?" Hua Yan said, "The people in the tribe can't accept your identity for the time being. Even my father is the same. So, I can't let you become the priest of our Black Fire tribe right now. But this is also good. We can take this opportunity to go to the fire god altar together. Since the fire god has already passed down a divine decree for you to go there must be a deeper meaning." Lu Chen was startled and said, "Together?" Hua Yan nodded and said, "That's right. This is your first time here, so you don't understand the situation. This fire god altar is actually a secret holy land passed down by our Black Fire tribe since ancient times. It is said that in ancient times, when the fire god descended to the world, he appeared there. Now, in order to prevent the sacred place from being spied on by outsiders, the location of the fire god altar has been strictly protected by our tribe. Only the patriarch's bloodline has been passed down from generation to generation. Now in this world, only Father and I know of that place." He took a deep breath and said, "So if I don't bring you there, you might never find that place." Lu Chen was silent. A moment later, he suddenly smiled. After that, he looked at Hua Yan and said, "You've probably forgotten what I told you, right?" Hua Yan said, "What? I'm not the emissary of your fire god. I've never felt or heard of any god's decree. It was an accident that I got the fire god's staff. I've never thought of becoming a priest of your Black Fire tribe. Even my coming to the southern wilderness was also an inexplicable accident." Hua Yan suddenly interrupted Lu Chen and said resolutely and decisively, "Have you ever thought that perhaps this is the will of the fire god that allowed you to come to our Black Fire tribe?" Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. Looking at Hua Yan's unswerving and resolute expression, a feeling of helplessness welled up in his heart. At this point, he already understood that it was probably impossible to convince this seemingly powerful and persistent barbarian. Perhaps to him, since birth, he had always believed in the fire god and would never waver in the slightest. Therefore, Lu Chen decisively changed his angle and directly said to Hua Yan, "All right, I won't talk nonsense with you anymore. Right now, I don't want to be the priest. What are you going to do, kill me?" Hua Yan's breathing became slightly heavier and an ominous glint flashed in the depths of his eyes. But very quickly, he restrained himself and said in a deep voice, "Can you tell me the reason?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "Do I still need to say it? Wasn't it obvious enough at the tribe just now? Just like how your father and the others look at me. You are barbarians and I am a human. When we meet, we will fight to the death. No one will believe the other. I believe you, Huayan said. The fire god sent you here. No matter who you are, I will definitely believe you. Lu Chen paused and shook his head. It's useless even if you believe me. You're not the only person in the Black Fire tribe. Huayan said. I can let them slowly accept you. Lu Chen said, all right, even if you're really so powerful that you can change everyone's mind, you can't change my own mind. I am a human and I don't really know your witchcraft. So, it's impossible for me to become the Black Fire tribe's priest. What's so bad about being our priest? Huayan looked a little agitated. As long as you really do it, even if you are a human, our Black Fire tribe starting from me, will definitely revere and respect you. We will not dare to slight you. And in this vast wilderness, besides our tribe, all the other barbarians will want to kill you the moment they see you. Only we can protect you. If I become a priest, maybe I will die faster. What? Huayan was suddenly startled. Lu Chen looked at him meaningfully and said, the tribe's priest position is so important and noble. How can you be sure that everyone will obey a human like me? Not to mention other things, your father and that son of yours are arrogant and unruly. Will they obey me? Huayan immediately fell silent. Lu Chen continued, besides that, if I sit in this position, I will be the target of everyone. Without power, the tribesmen will not obey me. With power, the other tribes will see me as a thorn in their side. There will definitely be wars and assassinations. When that time comes, I won't even be able to sleep peacefully. Why should I live such a life? The corner of Huayan's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something but stopped. Looking at Lu Chen's bright eyes, he sighed after a long while and said, since ancient times, it has been said that you humans are the most treacherous and cunning. Today, it seems that you really live up to your reputation. Nonsense. Lu Chen bluntly retorted, I just don't want to die. You look like a straightforward person on the outside, but on the inside, you are really cunning. Huayan snorted and didn't argue with Lu Chen. After thinking for a while, he suddenly said, then is there any way that you can help our Black Fire tribe? No. Lu Chen didn't show any politeness towards this barbarian and directly rejected him. But very quickly, Huayan suddenly smiled. That smile seemed a little mysterious, and on his fierce face, it seemed slightly out of place. He lowered his voice and took a step forward, getting closer to Lu Chen. In a low voice he said, then what if I say that I might have a way for you to return to the north? What? For thousands of years, the separation of the north and south had long been a matter deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Not to mention the southern barbarians. Even the flourishing and powerful human cultivators in the north were helpless against the incomparably dangerous disorienting lands. If there really was a passage in the disorienting lands that connected the north and south, the human cultivator army would have long ago attacked. To Lu Chen, Huayan's words were so fake that he wanted to laugh. But when he saw the serious expression on Huayan's face, he couldn't help but swallow the words that were on the tip of his tongue. After a moment of silence he said, are you joking? No. Huayan said. Do you know of a secret passage that can allow me to return to the north? Yes. I don't believe you. Lu Chen suddenly sneered. The enmity between our two races is as deep as the sea. If there really was such a passage, the barbarians would have long since killed their way there. Huayan shook his head. That passage is incomparably dangerous. Ordinary people can't pass through it. If a large army were to head there, it would only result in complete annihilation. On the contrary, if it was a single person, perhaps there would be a chance. Lu Chen sneered. Do you think I will believe your ridiculous words? Huayan stared at him and suddenly took a step forward. This time, he whispered in Lu Chen's ear in the lowest voice possible. At first, Lu Chen's expression was still somewhat cold. But very quickly, he revealed a look of astonishment. Then, his eyebrows furrowed and he fell into deep thought. Even after Huayan finished speaking and took a few steps back, Lu Chen was still in deep thought for a while. After a while he looked up at Huayan and asked, is this true? Huayan's expression was indifferent. He reached into a beast's skin bag at his waist and felt around for a while. Then, he threw something over. Lu Chen grabbed it and looked at it carefully. It was half a broken wooden tablet. It was dark brown in color and half the size of a palm. He could vaguely see a picture carved on one side. It was twisted and stretched. It was neither a word nor a seal. For a moment, he couldn't tell what it looked like. However, Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. His gaze was fixed on the wooden tablet. After a long while, he let out a long breath and threw the wooden tablet back to Huayan. Huayan caught it and stared at Lu Chen. "How is it? Do you recognize this thing?" Lu Chen slowly said, "Consider yourself lucky. There aren't many people in this world who can recognize this thing, but I just happen to be one of them." A light flashed in Huayan's eyes. "Then you believe me?" Lu Chen was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Although what you said is a little absurd, I believe you." Huayan quietly clenched his fist and took a step forward. "You're willing to help me?" Lu Chen slowly nodded. "Even if there's only a sliver of hope, I don't want to stay here." "Good," Huayan resolutely said. "I swear to you, as long as you can help me and make the Black Fire tribe strong again, I will tell you the secret that can let you return to the north. If I violate this oath, let the fire god punish me and make me die a horrible death." Lu Chen looked at him but shook his head and said, "No." Huayan frowned. "What?" Lu Chen stared at him and said word by word, "I don't want your life. If you want to swear, do it in the name of the entire Black Fire tribe. If you lie to me in the future, then the fire god will betray you and send down divine punishment. The Black Fire tribe will be exterminated from this world." Huayan was furious. He growled like a giant beast and grabbed Lu Chen's chest with both hands, almost lifting him up. Beside him, Atsu also jumped up in fright. He bared his sharp fangs at Huayan and growled. Huayan ignored Atsu and looked at Lu Chen with a pair of bloodthirsty eyes. "You dare to curse the Black Fire tribe?" Lu Chen's face showed no fear. He only said lightly, "What, you don't dare to make this oath?" Chapter 297. Huayan's bull-like eyes stared at Lu Chen for a long while, then slowly put him down. His expression also softened. After a while he suddenly said, "I am only one person, and not even the tribe leader. Even if I make such an oath, it may not necessarily be retribution to the tribe." Lu Chen nodded. "Yes, what you said makes sense." Huayan looked at him. "Then you still want me to make an oath?" Lu Chen calmly said, "It doesn't matter whether it counts or not. I just want to be at ease." Huayan stared at Lu Chen, and Lu Chen stared back at him. Neither of them had any intention of avoiding each other's eyes. After a while, Huayan nodded, took 2 steps to the side, and knelt down on one knee facing the vast wasteland. One hand on his chest, the other pointing to the sky. He repeated the oath that Lu Chen had just said. At this moment, Lu Chen's expression finally changed. When he looked at the barbarian Huayan again, his gaze became a little more complicated. There was a bit of caution, but also a bit of admiration. At the same time, the last ray of light in the sky finally disappeared. The sky darkened. "What do you plan to do next?" Lu Chen asked Huayan. Huayan said, "I will bring you to the fire god altar to see if the fire god has any orders. That place is quite far from here, and it is very well hidden. It is also very dangerous. Without me, you will not be able to find it." Lu Chen glanced at him. "Just the 2 of us?" Huayan said. "Just the 2 of us." Lu Chen pointed at the tribe's camp in the darkness. "Are you going to ignore them?" Huayan was silent for a while. "With my father here, the tribe will not fall into chaos. In addition, we have just defeated the mountain spirit tribe, so there will not be any sudden wars in this period of time." Before he finished speaking, a figure suddenly rushed out from the darkness. It was Huayan's son, Hua Ying. The young man's face was filled with excitement as he ran in front of Huayan, shouting, "Father, what are you doing?" The muscles on Huayan's face twitched slightly. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Son, I need to leave the tribe for a period of time. During this period of time, you have to help me lead the tribe. Don't be willful." "Why?" The Fire Hawk looked furious and incomprehensible. He pointed at Lu Chen and said, "Just for this human who suddenly appeared?" "Father, what's wrong with you today? Why do you seem like a different person all of a sudden?" Huayan shook his head and said, "This is the will of the fire god." "Son, Everything I do is for our Black Fire tribe. The Fire Hawk let out a low roar, but looking at his father's determined expression, he seemed to know that he could no longer persuade him. He could only turn his head and glare fiercely at Lu Chen. If looks could kill, Lu Chen would probably be dead by now. Then, the Fire Hawk clenched his teeth and ran back with large strides. He seemed extremely disappointed in his father. Lu Chen looked at the back of the young man and suddenly said, "Actually, what he said is somewhat reasonable. Anyone would feel that your decision is somewhat unimaginable." Huayan silently looked in the direction that the Fire Hawk disappeared, as well as the blurry shadow of the Black Fire tribe's camp in the night. After a while, he suddenly threw the Fire God's staff to Lu Chen, then turned and walked into the distance. At the same time he said, "Let's go." Lu Chen caught the Fire God's staff and turned it around in his hand. The smooth feeling made him feel somewhat familiar and intimate. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He casually leaned against his chest and the Fire God's staff instantly disappeared. He then called out to Atsu and quickly followed Huayan. As they walked, Huayan intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Lu Chen's chest. A strange look flashed in his eyes, but in the end, he didn't say anything. After walking like this for a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked him, "There's something I still want to ask you." Huayan said, "Speak." Lu Chen said, "The entire Black Fire tribe doesn't believe me. You're just one person. With your status and identity, why would you take such a great risk and do something so reckless that you almost fell out with your tribe?" Huayan silently walked forward. After a while he said in a low voice, "They can't see the danger." "What danger?" "The danger of the tribe's extinction." Lu Chen frowned. "What do you mean?" Huayan's face darkened, then he slowly said, "Ever since the ancestors of the tribe escaped from the north 1,000 years ago, bad luck has been haunting our Black Fire tribe. This is because those ancestors committed a great sin and were punished by the Fire God." Lu Chen thought for a moment, then looked at him and asked tentatively, "You mean to say, what did the ancestors of the Black Fire tribe do when they escaped from the north?" Huayan smiled bitterly, then said bitterly, "Back then your human cultivator army was too strong. After a bloody battle, the outcome was clear. Back then, the Black Fire tribe was second to none, and was responsible for covering the retreat of the other tribes as they fled south. But at the most critical moment, our ancestors abandoned the shamans, priests, and warriors who were engaged in a fierce battle. They crossed the Great Snow Mountain and the Broken Spirit Sand Sea and ran back to the wilderness." Lu Chen was startled, then seemed to think of something. "Later, your powerful ancestors didn't come back?" Huayan sighed and said, "Later on, the war became extremely intense. Your human race had unrivaled masters who fought, causing the mountains to collapse and the earth to crack, the terrain to change. The only path was also sealed. After that, those people were never able to return." Lu Chen was speechless. After a moment of silence, Huayan's tone seemed to have calmed down. "Of course they did," Huayan said indifferently. "Kidnapping, murder, interrogation, war. Our Black Fire tribe has experienced it all. Otherwise, our strength wouldn't have declined so quickly. Later on, they used all kinds of methods, but they still didn't get any news. Therefore this matter gradually faded. They probably thought that the Fire God altar was just a legend." Lu Chen wanted to say something but stopped. He felt an inexplicable pressure on his body. Such an important secret had been kept by the Black Fire tribe for so many years. It had only been passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. But now, Huayan was bringing him there just like that. Part of this was because of the so-called Fire God. Carrying a Fire God staff was too attractive. But Huayan, this barbarian's decisiveness, once again made Lu Chen exclaim in his heart. He raised his head to look at Huayan. He thought to himself, this barbarian is probably the most gambler and craziest of all the barbarians in all these years. Just like that, they walked for 2 days, but they still hadn't reached the place that Huayan had mentioned. However, on the second day, when they were walking on the desolate wasteland, a gust of yellow sand and dust suddenly blew towards them. Then, there was a shrill whistling sound, as if someone was howling towards the sky, and also as if there was a magnificent army floating over from the depths of the wasteland in front of them. Chapter 298. Hua Yan's expression suddenly changed, looking somewhat nervous. He quickly laid down on the ground and stuck his ear to the ground to listen for a while. His expression immediately became ugly. Lu Chen also frowned and asked, "What, is there trouble?" Hua Yan nodded and said, "It could be a pack of wolves." There were packs of wolves in the wasteland, and these wolves were not ordinary wolves. They were all powerful demonic wolves that had advanced to the next rank. They often formed packs of 10 and wreaked havoc in the wasteland. Apart from not daring to attack the tribal camps or the barbarian settlements, there was almost nothing in the wasteland that the demonic wolves did not dare to attack. Wolf packs ate everything they could eat. Wild beasts, demonic beasts, and even lone or small numbers of barbarian people. Demonic wolves were extremely powerful, fierce and agile. That was why a few dozen demonic wolves could run with the might of a magnificent army. It was extremely shocking. But Hua Yan's expression was ugly as he looked at the yellow sand in front of him. He anxiously asked with a trace of doubt, "Shouldn't these wolves live near the plains in the south? Why would they come to the desert?" Although a few dozen ferocious and powerful demon wolves gathered together had terrifying battle strength, they also needed a lot of food every day. Therefore, in this extremely barren and desolate area near the northern border, it was actually impossible to raise too many demon wolves. Most of the wolf pack's activity area was further south. In the past, Hua Yan had walked along this route to the fire god altar, but he had never met a wolf pack except this time. "Damn! What is going on?" Hua Yan cussed angrily. Lu Chen was still relatively calm. He said to him, "If this wolf pack is really so strong, why don't we first run a distance and avoid them?" Hua Yan smiled bitterly and shook his head. His gaze was looking around, as if he was looking for something. At the same time he said, "It's useless. The wolf pack's sense of smell is extremely sharp. As long as we are targeted by them, we cannot escape unless there is a large river nearby." Other than yellow sand, there was only dry sand nearby. Of course, there would not be a large river like the Dragon River. Lu Chen thought for a while and said to Hua Yan, "I think we can run." Hua Yan was startled and turned to look at him. Lu Chen patted Atsu's back and said very calmly, "This black wolf of mine is especially good at escaping. Whether it's speed or endurance, it's definitely better than those demonic beasts, so I should be able to escape if I want to. But as for you..." He paused for a moment, sizing up Hua Yan, and then said with sincerity, "You are so tall and burly, and your footsteps are so loud, I don't need to ask to know how heavy you are. I can't bring you along to escape, or else we will die together." Hua Yan was speechless. He looked at Lu Chen, and after a while he said, "Have you always been this straightforward with your words?" "Not really. I only do this when I'm in a life-and-death situation." "All right." The two of them stood side by side, looking at the vast wasteland and the yellow sand that was being kicked up, listening to the soul-stirring sound that was getting closer and closer. Then they looked at each other. Hua Yan frowned and said, "Why aren't you running?" Lu Chen said, "I feel that Atsu can bring me along and escape, but seeing how calm you are, I really want to see just how you will escape." Hua Yan was silent for a moment and said, "I have no choice." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, "Oh, so you are waiting for death here?" Hua Yan sighed, but there was no fear on his face. Instead, a trace of helplessness appeared on his face as he said, "This is the will of the heavens, there is nothing I can do." Lu Chen clicked his tongue twice and said while shaking his head, "Looking at you before, you have a great breadth of mind and spirit. You should be a rare heroic figure in the brute tribe. Logically speaking, this kind of matter shouldn't be too difficult for you." Hua Yan snorted and said, "Thank you for thinking so highly of me, but it's a pity that I have ambition, but the fire god doesn't take pity on me. I am fated to die here. Heart higher than the sky, life thinner than paper." Lu Chen couldn't help but think of an old saying passed down from the human race. Although it was a little strange to use it on this fierce brute, the meaning was more or less the same. He shook his head and sighed, then looked at the yellow sand that was getting closer and closer. The mournful howls seemed to be right next to his ears. "Is there really no other way?" Lu Chen asked. "Yes," Hua Yan responded, and said, "Looks like it's about time you should go. I am a black fire warrior after all. I have to fight before I die." As he said that, he slowly pulled out the giant axe that he was wearing. "Even if you give up, in the future when I return to the north, My only hope is still on you. Lu Chen said, since you are going to die anyway, why don't you tell me that secret before you die? Hua Yan shook his head and said, no. Lu Chen spread out his hands and said, why is that? Do you want to keep this matter to yourself even if you have to die? Hua Yan said seriously, that day, I solemnly swore to the fire god that if you can't help the Black Fire tribe rise to power, I can't tell you. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, then I promise you as long as you tell me, I will definitely do it, okay? Still no. Damn. Lu Chen couldn't help but curse and said, why is that? Hua Yan said, after I die, the Black Fire tribe will never accept you. Even if they are exterminated, they will not let you become the tribe's priest. So your promise is meaningless. It's just a bunch of nonsense. Lu Chen glared at this barbarian who was about to die but still had a surprisingly good brain. His face was full of anger. A faint smile appeared on Hua Yan's originally ferocious face, and he even appeared somewhat relaxed. He even extended his hand and gently patted Lu Chen's shoulder. After which, he said, although I do not wish to die in this place for no reason, it is actually very interesting to think that I am able to get to know a human like you before I die. It's a pity that I will not be able to accomplish such great things with you in the future. Ha ha ha. As he laughed, the fierce and mighty berserker looked as if he had already seen through life and death. Not only did he not run away with the great axe in his hand, he started to walk forward instead. After a while, Lu Chen's somewhat annoyed voice suddenly came from behind him. There was even a faint trace of frustration in his voice as he complained, I didn't think that I wouldn't suffer a loss in front of that damn baldy, but today I actually suffered in front of a barbarian fool like you. Hua Yan's footsteps paused for a moment. He probably didn't understand what it meant to lose in front of a barbarian. But very quickly he heard Lu Chen say, hey, come back, I have a way to save you. Hua Yan's eyes lit up. With a hoo sound, he put away his great axe and jumped back. He anxiously asked Lu Chen, what way? The big man suddenly rushed over with an imposing aura, causing Lu Chen to jump in fright. He couldn't help but say, I say, didn't you look as if you had seen through life and death just now? Hua Yan spat and said, only an idiot would want to die. Didn't I have no other way? As he spoke, he grinned and stared at Lu Chen as he said, quickly tell me how to save me. Afterwards, he glanced at Atsu and said to himself, could it be that your accompanying demonic beast is really gifted? It can actually carry the two of us and escape? Of course not. Lu Chen sneered, then said seriously, this is an absolute secret of mine. I can't easily reveal it to others. If it wasn't for you being so tight-lipped, and that this secret can only be known from you, I definitely wouldn't let you know. How about this? Make another vow that you will never reveal this secret of mine, even to those closest to you. Hua Yan looked at him deeply and nodded. Then, just like before, he solemnly swore an oath to the fire god. Even the retribution of the oath was the same as before. Smoke and dust soared into the sky. The endless yellow sand was already rushing towards them, and the stench of blood was already faintly discernible. Lu Chen said, you are really decisive. You said you would make an oath, and you did it without the slightest bit of hesitation. Hua Yan pointed at the yellow sand that was already in front of them and said, escaping is more important. If we don't do it quickly, we have no choice. Huh. A long howl came from the yellow sand, and a huge black shadow faintly appeared. It looked like a giant wolf. Its entire body was black and gray, and it was about the same size as the Atsu. The only difference was that the Atsu's fur was pure black, and not messy like the other wolf demons. Lu Chen snorted and called for the Atsu to come closer. Then, he stretched out his hand and pulled Hua Yan. In just a few moments, there were already no less than 10 giant wolves in the rolling yellow sand. They all roared fiercely and rushed over, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. It was a terrifying sight. At the same time, a white light suddenly lit up. After a flash in the yellow sand, the two figures and the Atsu's body suddenly disappeared at the same time. All of the giant wolves pounced on empty air, and a few of them even fiercely collided with each other. For a moment, the sound of crashing could be heard. The pack of wolves angrily roared, and their sharp fangs frantically searched the surroundings. But everything disappeared as if it was an illusion, as if the two people and one wolf had never existed. Only in an inconspicuous corner of the yellow sand, on the ground, a small seed was covered by the rolling dust, rolling about in the terrifying claws of the pack of wolves, and then buried even deeper into the sand, never to be seen again. Needless to say, Lu Chen, Huayan, and the Atsu all hid in the mysterious ancient tree hole. After the white light flashed in the silent tree hole, their bodies suddenly fell to the ground. Then, Huayan was the first to jump up, holding the giant axe in his hand tightly. His eyes revealed a trace of vigilance as he looked around. "Don't worry, there's no danger here." Lu Chen's somewhat unhappy voice came from behind him. Different from Huayan, Lu Chen and the Atsu had already adapted to the situation here. At this moment, they were lazily sitting up. Huayan looked around again, and after confirming that there was nothing dangerous, he let out a sigh of relief. He grinned and looked towards Lu Chen. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, his expression abruptly changed. Before he could even utter a single word, his eyes suddenly rolled back into his head, and he actually directly fell to the ground. With a bang, he seemed to have fallen unconscious. Chapter 299. Lu Chen and Atsu, who were about to stand up in a relaxed manner, suddenly froze at the same time. They watched in shock as Huayan's huge body crashed down like a collapsing mountain, heavily smashing into the ground with a dull thud. This sound was painful to listen to. If there were any more crisp cracking sounds, Lu Chen would have thought that Huayan had probably broken his own bones. The man and dog were stunned on the ground for a moment. Then they looked at each other. Atsu also seemed to be very confused. He looked at Huayan, then looked at Lu Chen, then suddenly jumped up, his tail wagging wildly, and barked a few times at Lu Chen, actually revealing a look of flattery. Lu Chen spat and pushed away the big dog head that had come up to him. He angrily scolded. "Are you stupid? How could it be me?" After saying that, he hurriedly went forward to check on Huayan's condition. Atsu seemed to have let bygones be bygones, and seemed to be in a good mood. He followed beside Lu Chen, sticking his head out to look at Huayan. From time to time, he would use his nose to sniff the barbarian's body a few times. After a brief inspection, Lu Chen discovered that there were no bleeding wounds on Huayan's body. Of course, there were no signs of any broken bones. It seemed that everything was fine. But this barbarian warrior, who was as strong as a bull, was currently inexplicably unconscious. At the same time, his chest was heaving up and down rapidly. His breathing was also rapid. His eyes had turned white, and his cheeks were swollen red. He looked like a fish that had been thrown onto the shore, or a monster that had strangled his throat and made him unable to breathe. He looked like he was in extreme pain. Lu Chen was also momentarily stunned and at a loss for what to do. He and Atu had entered this place without any problems, but only Huayan had encountered such a strange thing. Even if he wanted to save him, he didn't know where to start. Lu Chen furrowed his brows and tried to get Huayan to lie flat, or help him turn over. However, these simple movements were obviously of no help to this barbarian, who had suddenly fallen into a painful coma. Huayan was still unconscious, and as time passed, his appearance became worse and worse. His cheeks were getting redder and redder, and his breathing was getting weaker. At the same time, his eyes were showing signs of bulging out. Upon seeing Huayan's current state, Lu Chen could not help but feel his scalp turn numb. If this strange state continued, he subconsciously felt that something extremely terrifying and horrifying would most likely happen to this barbarian. But how was she going to save him? Immediately pulling Huayan away from this mysterious tree hole was naturally the simplest and fastest method. However, the outside of the tree hole was likely surrounded by a large pack of incomparably ferocious demonic wolves. They were fuming with rage, and were furiously roaring as they dug 3 feet into the ground in order to find their missing prey. Once they left, only death would await them. Moreover, if he wanted Huayan to leave this place, Lu Chen himself would have to leave as well. In other words, Lu Chen would have to risk his life to help Huayan leave this place. Although Lu Chen felt that this barbarian Huayan was quite pleasing to the eye, he could forget about paying such a huge price. However, other than this cave was only so big. Other than the few things that he had thrown here, there was nothing else. In fact, Lu Chen did not even know what had caused Huayan to suddenly become like this, let alone find a way to save him. He stood up, and glanced at his surroundings in annoyance. Everywhere was the same. The ground, the tree walls, the hazy green chi, and at most, the two doorways that were faintly discernible embedded in the tree walls. Everything was the same as usual, but just what was it that caused Huayan to become so unaccustomed to this place the moment he entered? The only exit could not be exited, and there were similarly no other paths to take in this tree hole. Huayan's situation was getting worse and worse. In the blink of an eye, his cheeks were so red that it seemed as if blood was about to drip out. The bulges in his eyes grew larger and larger, as if something was about to explode in his body. It was truly a terrifying sight. In this anxious moment, Lu Chen recalled that before Huayan had entered this ancient tree hole, other than himself and Atsu, there was actually another person who had come here. White Lotus. Thinking of this, Lu Chen suddenly fell into deep thought. That day when White Lotus had entered here, she seemed to have encountered an accident. When she had entered, she had also fallen unconscious. However, what was different from Huayan was that she did not experience any difficulty in breathing, nor did her eyeballs bulge out of her body. Lu Chen was even more at a loss for a moment. Looking at the surroundings of the tree hole again, he felt that this tree hole that was originally very familiar to him had suddenly become a little strange. It was a little more sinister and scary, but he just couldn't tell what was strange about it. Why was he the only one who had entered without any problems? What was the problem? Lu Chen forcefully shook his head, throwing away the messy and distracting thoughts in his mind. At this moment, the most important thing was to think of a way to save Huayan's life. Otherwise, if this barbarian died, his only hope of returning to the north would most likely be lost. But how was he going to save him? There was no way to leave, and there were no elixirs. Looking at Huayan's current situation, it was obvious that the blood and qi in his body were under some kind of pressure. It was stimulated to the extreme and looked like it was about to explode. His expression was already extremely ugly, and two thin streaks of blood had already flowed down from his bulging eye sockets. Lu Chen did not doubt that if he still did not think of a way, this barbarian would very likely explode in front of him in a short while. That scene, just thinking about it, was extremely frightening. Lu Chen's forehead was also dripping with cold sweat. However, the situation in front of him seemed to be a dead end. There was no way out at all. Just as he was feeling extremely anxious, he saw that the black dog beside him did not seem to be interested in this tense atmosphere. At first, it would still curiously sniff Huayan, but very quickly, it walked away. At this time, it walked to the puddle in the tree hole, lying there and looking into the water. It seemed that the water there was much more interesting than this. Water. All of a sudden, Lu Chen's body trembled violently. Everything in this huge ancient tree hole was exactly the same. The only thing that was different was the puddle in the middle of the tree hole. This thought flashed through Lu Chen's mind like a spark. He suddenly looked back and saw that Huayan's situation had reached the most critical point, and he was in danger of exploding at any time. At this time, he could not care so much. With a light shout, he directly grabbed Huayan's body and dragged him forward, all the way to the puddle. Atsu, who was originally lying on the edge of the water and looking at its own reflection, jumped up in shock. Before it could even react, it heard a whoosh, and a black shadow flashed past in front of it. A moment later, Huayan's huge body was directly thrown into the puddle by Lu Chen. Dong! With a loud bang, water splashed all over the place, splashing all over Atsu, who was caught off guard, and splashed all over his body. Atsu screamed and took 2 steps back. Then, it bared its teeth and barked at Huayan in the puddle, looking very angry. As for Lu Chen, he had jumped away in advance and was not splashed much by the water. However, he was more concerned about Huayan's situation. After the water splashed, he quickly leaned forward again, wanting to see if this barbarian would be better in the water. Actually, Lu Chen did not have much confidence in his own ability. Right now, it was just a desperate attempt. If this method did not work, then Huayan could only blame himself for being unlucky. The water in the puddle trembled violently, swaying non-stop. Huayan's body was bobbing up and down in the water, but there were no signs of him waking up. Lu Chen's heart sank slightly. Could it be that the heavens want you dead? Atsu, who was at the side, came over curiously. It leaned against Lu Chen's side and looked. Seeing that Huayan did not move for a long time, it snorted and began to shake its body to get rid of the water droplets on its body. For a moment, the sound of water splashing could be heard, and the water droplets splashed everywhere, splashing all over Lu Chen's body. Lu Chen cursed and pushed the stupid dog away. At this moment, he did not have the mood to argue with it. He was still carefully watching Huayan in the water. After a while, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he let out a sound of surprise. He saw that Huayan's entire body was submerged in the water. Although he was still unconscious, he did not know why, but the red color on his face was slowly receding. His pair of scary bulging eyes were also slowly calming down, gradually returning to normal. This puddle was actually effective. For a moment, Lu Chen did not know what to say. After a while, he laughed and let out a long breath. He then stood up and said indifferently, "Consider yourself lucky." Without a doubt, this puddle was the most miraculous thing in this mysterious ancient tree hole. In the past, when Lu Chen was tormented by the evil curse of burning his body and soul, he had also hidden in this place to struggle at death's door. After 10 years, he had finally broken free from the frightening black flame curse, but at the same time, he had used up all the life essence in this puddle. Today, the water in this puddle was no different from an ordinary puddle. But today, it seemed to have saved Huayan's life. Even though Lu Chen did not understand the reason behind this, he waited for a while by the side of the puddle. After seeing that Huayan's condition had mostly returned to normal, he picked up Huayan's head and placed it at the side, slightly away from the water. This was to prevent Huayan from suffocating to death if he stayed underwater for a long time. During this time, he was extremely careful, afraid that something would happen if Huayan showed his head. If that was the case, then he really could not do anything. But fortunately, it seemed that Huayan, whose body was mostly submerged in the water, was no longer in that strange situation and had returned to normal. However, just like White Lotus, he was still unconscious. After placing Huayan down, Lu Chen walked to the side and sat down next to Atsu. Atsu raised its head and looked at him. Lu Chen also smiled at it. Then, he frowned slightly and said to Atsu in a soft voice, "Atsu, do you also feel that it's strange? Why is it like this? What is it that the two of us have that they don't?" You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.